A man showed up at our door, saying my daughter ran off without paying $3,000 at his fancy steakhouse, said Bill. He claimed to be the head chef, but I couldn't believe it. I'm Leila, 30 years old, living with my husband Daniel and our daughter Emma. There was no way Emma could do such a thing. I stood firm against their fierce expressions, defending my daughter's innocence. I was tricked by an ex-boyfriend who took $3,000 from me and then disappeared when I found out I was pregnant with his baby. I tried to contact him, but he was gone. I was left alone, divorced and almost broke. But I didn't give up. I had Emma and was ready to face whatever came next. Then the news came that my ex was arrested. The man who told me was Daniel, now my husband. He stood by me through everything, even though I was tired and worn out. Despite our age gap, I was drawn to Daniel's strength and reliability. I worried he wouldn't accept me because I was divorced, but he did. Now we're happily together, with a good relationship with Daniel's parents. One day, I got a call from Daniel's parents. My mother-in-law's voice, full of warmth, asked if we could visit. They wanted to see their granddaughter, whom they adore despite not being related by blood. I happily agreed and promised to let Daniel know. After exchanging pleasantries, my mother-in-law ended the call. It takes about 5 hours to reach their countryside home from the city where we live. When Daniel returned home in the evening, I excitedly told him about the invitation from his parents. "Well, I haven't taken any vacation this month yet," he replied. "Let's take some time off and go see them. I'll ask my boss if we can have a few days off in a row," Daniel suggested eagerly, dialing his boss for permission. Thankfully, his boss agreed, and we began looking forward to reuniting with his parents after a long while. However, on the day of our visit, Daniel suddenly had to work. "You go ahead. I'll join you as soon as I'm done. It might be late, possibly not until tomorrow morning," he explained, kissing us goodbye before heading to the office. I quickly informed my in-laws about the change of plans and then embarked on the journey with my daughter. As soon as we arrived at my in-laws' house, they welcomed us warmly, and we settled in comfortably. They were eagerly awaiting Daniel's arrival. The next morning, my in-laws went about their usual routine, heading to the barn. I offered to help, but they insisted I relax and enjoy my visit, so I stayed behind, waiting for their return. Suddenly, the doorbell rang too early for Daniel's arrival. Assuming it was a neighbor, I hurried to answer it. "I'm coming," I called out, opening the door to find a stern-looking man in his 70s standing there. He glared at me and then demanded, "I own the local steakhouse. Your daughter ate there and left without paying. You owe me $3,000. His words caught me off guard, and I blinked in surprise. He went on to explain that a young girl had visited his restaurant the previous night. Despite being warned that it was too expensive for her, she consumed $3,000 worth of food and drinks before leaving without paying. He claimed she was my daughter and insisted that as her parent, I should foot the bill. I shake my head, trying to explain, but he's too angry to listen. "Can I know your name?" I ask. "It's Ethan. Now pay up," he snaps back. "I need to check with my in-laws if they know you," I respond. "What? Shouldn't you be paying me instead of wasting time?" "Yes, but please give me a moment." I ask him to wait and quickly call my in-laws to confirm something. They respond fast, revealing a surprising fact. Trying to keep my composure, I turn to the man. "I can't pay you," I tell him. "What? You don't care if my business suffers? If you don't pay, I'll call the police," he threatens. "Please, let's try to sort out this misunderstanding," I plead. "There's no misunderstanding. I got her name when she dined," Ethan insists, reaching for his phone to call the police. A policeman happened to pass by, and the steakhouse owner flagged him down to explain the situation. The officer approached me with a stern look and said, "Can we talk?" Confused and intimidated by his gaze, I didn't know what to do. "Your daughter is suspected of dining and dashing. If things remain unresolved, we'll have to take her into custody," he informed me, insisting that I hand over my daughter immediately. "No, there's been a mistake. My daughter wouldn't do such a thing." I protested, but the officer remained firm. Sensing the tension, the steakhouse owner intervened, offering a compromise. "I'm not heartless. If you can pay, I'll forgive her. After all, we're neighbors, he said, looking at me. Are you sure about this, Ethan? The officer asked. Of course. She's just a young girl. It's an honor she wanted to eat at my place, Ethan replied with a laugh. The officer then presented me with an option. Ethan is giving you a way out. Pay the $3,000 bill and he won't press charges. Despite the pressure, I stood firm in my decision. As I tried to explain, the steakhouse owner's face turned red with anger and he shouted, "You're rejecting my kindness. Is this how you've taught your daughter to behave? Don't play games with me. Please calm down. Why are you refusing to pay? If you don't, your daughter will face serious consequences," the police officer interjected, looking puzzled. "I can't agree to this without considering all the facts," I responded, but the steakhouse owner interrupted with a laugh, saying, My apologies. Are you saying you don't have $3,000 on you right now? No worries. We all forget things as we get older. We do accept credit cards at our establishment. If you trust me with your card, I can process the payment now and return it to you later. How does that sound? With that, he gestured for me to fetch my wallet. I declined to hand over my credit card, expressing concern about the risk, and instead offered to accompany him to settle the payment. However, the steakhouse owner responded with threats, raising his fist and shouting, "Don't you trust me? I'm in the credit business. Be careful what you say, or you'll regret it." When I insisted on accompanying him, he became agitated, yelling, "You're disrespecting me. I have connections with influential organizations. If you can't pay, I have ways to make you pay $3,000. That's why I've involved the police." Shocked by his words, I looked to the police officer for assistance, but he avoided eye contact, feigning ignorance. "Officer, did you hear that? Is this allowed?" I asked, seeking help. The officer avoided the question, stating, "I didn't hear anything. Just pay the money and everything will be resolved." "Leila, just follow instructions," the officer insisted sternly. I was stunned. How could a police officer say that? I felt bewildered as the steakhouse owner continued to intimidate me with his threats. Most people would give in to their demands to avoid trouble, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Aren't the police supposed to protect citizens? Why are they siding with him? Despite my desperate pleas, the officer remained silent, refusing to intervene. Feeling helpless, I turned to the steakhouse owner. "Why won't you listen?" he growled, glaring at me. "It's not that I'm not taking you seriously. I can't believe I'm in this situation," I thought to myself, steadfastly refusing to comply. But neither the officer nor the steakhouse owner seemed willing to listen to reason. As I pondered my next move, a taxi pulled up outside our house, and my husband stepped out, looking puzzled. "What's going on?" "Who are these people?" he asked, bewildered. "Sir, your wife needs to take responsibility." "Let me explain," the officer began, but my husband's expression quickly changed to surprise as he listened. Then, with a mischievous grin, he seemed to understand everything. "Sorry for the confusion. My apologies. By the way, officer, which department do you work for? Can I see your badge?" My husband inquired suddenly, catching everyone off guard. The officer hesitated but eventually produced his badge from his pocket. This looks suspicious," my husband remarked, causing the officer to start sweating nervously. Daniel chuckles and says, "Just kidding." The police officer, visibly relieved, manages a forced smile. Daniel then asks about the officer's department and rank. "Is that necessary right now?" The officer responds nervously. "I'm just curious," Daniel says. "I'm a constable stationed at the police box," the officer answers. "Ah, I see. You must be new around here. Thanks for your service," Daniel replies politely. "Yes, I'm still getting acquainted. Would you mind if I contact your station? Can I use the name on your badge?" Daniel asks, pulling out his phone. Before he can proceed, the officer interrupts. "Before we get into that, can you tell me if you're able to pay for Ethan's bill?" He urges Daniel for an answer regarding the payment issue. The steakhouse owner, Ethan, appeared taken aback by my husband's assertiveness, his earlier aggression dissipating. "You're the husband, so take responsibility," Ethan insisted. "Yes, but I don't have a job that pays that much," Daniel responded calmly. That doesn't excuse dodging your bills, Ethan retorted. Unperturbed, Daniel shrugged. Anyway, he continued, can you tell me your gun's serial number? Ethan looked confused. Why? He asked. It's a standard verification method, Daniel explained. Knowing the number doesn't pose a risk. It's widely accepted. The police officer, also puzzled, questioned Daniel's request. Is that so? He inquired. Observing their reactions, my suspicions grew stronger. By the way, Daniel interjected, giving them a stern look. Would you like to hear my take on this dine and dash incident? They both seemed puzzled by his unexpected suggestion. In conclusion, you're a phony cop trying to run a scam with that old man, my husband accused, catching them off guard. Do you have any proof? They retorted. Then prove I'm wrong, my husband challenged. Turning to me, he said, Lee, bring her here. I rushed to bring our precious child forward, positioning her in front of us to prevent any harm. Daniel stood protectively between us. My daughter is only 1 year old. She can't even walk, let alone dine and dash, he asserted. The two were stunned, mouths agape. That's impossible. Is that really Arya Taylor? Ethan questioned. Of course. I'm only 30 years old. When else could I have had my first child? I countered. Ethan, visibly shaken, took a step back, exchanging a glance with the police officer who nodded in agreement. It seems there's been a mistake. Sorry for the confusion, they stammered, preparing to leave. Daniel intervened, blocking their escape routes as they attempted to leave. I retreated to the entrance, observing through a gap in the door. Can you step aside, please? The officer demanded. No, we won't let you go. You might be scammers, and we won't allow it, Daniel countered firmly. Don't try to intimidate us. I'm a police officer. If you don't move, I'll arrest you for obstructing an investigation, the officer threatened, attempting to push past Daniel, but he swiftly moved to block him again. I apologize for not introducing myself earlier. I'm Daniel Taylor, Chief Inspector of the New York Investigation Division, Daniel announced, revealing his genuine police badge. Unlike the officers, Daniel's badge gleamed with authenticity. Who's the liar now? I'm the real deal, he declared confidently. Whether you're genuine or not, you've engaged in fraud, correct? It's a disgrace for someone in law enforcement. Do you even understand the role of the investigation division? Daniel pressed. What are you talking about? You're clueless about the investigation division, he continued. The division handles complex crimes like fraud, embezzlement, counterfeiting, election violations, financial crimes, defamation, and high-tech offenses. In simpler terms, it deals with criminals like you, Daniel explained sternly. With that, he swiftly produced handcuffs and began to arrest them. Unable to resist Daniel's professional approach, the two were quickly subdued. Daniel wasted no time in contacting the authorities. I've apprehended fraudsters on the scene. This is beyond my jurisdiction. Please dispatch officers from the appropriate area immediately, he instructed over the phone. As they heard Daniel's call, the scammers' faces drained of color. Please forgive us. We were desperate for money. It's our first offense. Please let us go, they pleaded. Just then, my in-laws arrived with the police. Are you all right? Sorry for the delay. This guy was terrible at explaining things. My in-laws apologized. It's all right. Wait, you're here too. What a relief, I responded as they embraced me and our daughter. I had been on edge throughout the ordeal, but finally, I could relax and exhale a sigh of relief as the two fraudsters were escorted into a police car. Initially, I had suspected only the old man to be involved in the scam. When I phoned my in-laws, I inquired if anyone named Ethan resided nearby. They were unfamiliar with the name, having lived in the area for years and knowing all the residents. Their lack of recognition confirmed that this Ethan was not a local. Moreover, considering my daughter's age of just 1, it was implausible for her to have been involved in any dine and dash scheme. Though I hadn't explicitly requested it, my in-laws grasped the urgency of the situation and promised to summon the police. While awaiting their arrival, I felt a surge of tension, resolved to safeguard my daughter. I had sensed something amiss with the police officer from the moment he appeared. As our conversation progressed, my distrust towards him only deepened. Although I lacked concrete evidence initially, Daniel's interrogation ultimately confirmed my suspicions of his falsity. Thankfully, Daniel's presence had averted a potential disaster this time. However, the thought of what could have transpired in his absence sent shivers down my spine. I'm truly relieved that everything ended safely. With Daniel's assistance and the local authorities' involvement, the case regarding the two fraudsters was swiftly resolved. Upon investigation, it became evident that numerous charges awaited them. Daniel recounted the details to me, wearing a mixture of sadness and anger on his face. Surprisingly, it turned out that these individuals were not affiliated with any organization, and their exploits garnered nationwide attention through the news. Thanks to Daniel and my considerate in-laws, I was able to spend an extra day at their home. The news of Daniel's heroic actions spread rapidly, prompting our neighbors to bring over an array of delicacies, turning our gathering into an impromptu celebration. Even our daughter seemed to revel in the joyous atmosphere, remaining cheerful throughout the evening. That night, as I gazed at my daughter's contented face, I couldn't help but bask in the warmth of our happiness.
My name is Julie, and I'm 30 years old. I work for a foreign investment company. My husband, James, has a job in services, but his contract is not stable because it gets renewed every year. This uncertainty makes us worried, especially towards the end of the year. James' family values government jobs a lot because his parents used to work for the government, and his sister still does. They don't really respect my job in a private company. Since we got married, we've been living with his family, who always make me feel bad about working for foreigners. In investment firms, the main goal is to make money and pay employees. Some people believe that those who work in private companies couldn't get government jobs. And if you work for a foreign company, it's because you couldn't find a job in a local company. James grew up thinking this way because of his family. So even though his job isn't permanent, he sticks to it because it gives him a certain status and salary. Once, I asked James, who was feeling anxious about his job, if it's safer to have a permanent job in a regular company than being a temporary worker in a government job, especially towards the end of the fiscal year. He quickly replied, "If I'm not a civil servant, it's better not to work at all." It seems like my husband hasn't told his parents that he's working as a temporary government employee, so he keeps asking me to keep it a secret. Also, because of his British nature, he boasts about getting promoted. It's a lie I don't understand, but he wants to keep up appearances to his parents and sister. He doesn't show me his salary statement, but only a small amount is deposited into the account. I asked, "This is James, he's a section manager now. His salary must have increased, right? How much is it now?" My husband quickly replied with just 4 words, "You can earn so much these days." I know I earn a good amount, but I'm not sure how it compares to what a section chief civil servant makes. I work as a bond trader, and most of my salary comes from commissions. Lately, I've been making consistent profits, so compared to other employees in regular companies, I earn quite a bit. When my husband mentioned the amount of money, my mother-in-law looked impressed, but she couldn't compare it to what people earned in her time. "But it seems James is doing well," she said proudly. His sister, who works at the city office, overheard our conversation. If he worked at the city office, he might be at the level of a division head. "Government jobs do pay well, don't they?" she commented. Seeing everyone's reactions, my husband looked even more uneasy. He seemed to regret bringing up my salary and swiftly changed the subject. "Let's not talk about salaries anymore. By the way, someone from the housing company visited recently. Are we considering renovations for this house?" He changed the topic. A sales rep from a housing company had indeed paid us a visit. Sensing my husband's train of thought, I decided to go along with the topic of home renovations. As for remodeling the kitchen, we were. But my mother-in-law cut me off abruptly, shouting, "Stay out of family matters. You're just a daughter-in-law. Keep quiet and do as you're told." She glared at me with a scared look. It seems like she's always unhappy with what I say and do. The main reason for her dissatisfaction seems to be that I'm not a government worker. She's particularly bothered by the fact that I manage my husband's salary and give him an allowance. My mother-in-law thinks my husband earns a lot, and she believes I control all of his money. But in reality, most of his salary goes towards his personal expenses, and our living costs are mostly covered by what I earn. As for my sister-in-law, she doesn't contribute anything to our expenses. You're taking money from an elderly couple who only have their pension. James earns a lot, so you're not struggling, right? She says, without any intention of helping out. Living in my husband's family home means we don't have to worry about paying rent, and we can manage with just my salary. But the atmosphere at home is undeniably tense. Unable to join the conversation about the housing company, I hurriedly cleaned up the kitchen after dinner. Neither my mother-in-law nor sister-in-law offered to help with the housework. After finishing my job, I rushed back home to cook, clean, and do laundry without a break. One good thing about working for a foreign company is that I don't have to work overtime as long as I do my job well. Being able to leave work on time is a relief. It helps me keep my work and personal life separate, and I don't have to bring work home, which is a big advantage. On his days off, my husband works on his computer at home. I worry if it's okay for him to bring work home and do it there. When I tried to ask him about it, he said, "I can't work overtime, and if I don't finish on time, I get in trouble." Don't worry about it, it's not your concern. Ironically, I was the one being scolded. Lately, my husband has been in a bad mood, and he gets angry as soon as I try to talk to him. He even yelled at me when I asked about the housing issue. It's none of your business. Didn't Mom tell you that already? Just follow the rules. That's all you need to do. Despite taking care of the household chores and finances in his home, I'm unhappy with my husband's attitude of keeping me in the dark. One day, someone from a home building company came to my in-laws' house with a computer. Everyone except me started discussing floor plans and looked at housing designs on the computer. When I tried to see what they were doing while having tea, she yelled at me, "You don't need to see this. Go away." I was surprised to learn that they were planning to build a new house instead of renovating the current one. My father-in-law had mentioned expanding the house because it was getting cramped. It seems that's what they're actually planning. My in-laws, who retired from their government jobs, have a lump sum of retirement money. I guess they intend to use that money to build a new house. And since I moved in, they've been living on their pension without paying any living expenses, so they should have plenty of money. I decided to distance myself from the situation. What worries me is whether my sister-in-law plans to live in the new house too. She's 28 years old and could get married, but there's been no talk of that, so I assume she'll be living in the new house. I dislike her as much as I do my mother-in-law because she never helps with any chores and is always complaining. I wish she would get married soon, but my father-in-law told the home builder, "My daughter and her husband, my son, and us. Can we add another room? I want a house where all three households can live together." It was surprising to hear that my sister-in-law's husband might also live with us. But what's more surprising is that it's not about my son's family, but just my son. I was shocked that I wasn't included. The house they're planning to build is supposed to be quite big, but even so, the current site won't fit three households comfortably. Since my in-laws and sister-in-law are the ones building the house, I can't say anything, but I think keeping it clean will be a challenge. The man went out to see the model room and the construction site later. "You stay out of this, it's none of your business," my mother-in-law said spitefully. She probably expected me to argue back. She gave me a disapproving look when I didn't. It seems like the housing construction is moving forward. I'm not being told anything, but my in-laws and sister-in-law are getting ready for the move. Seeing my husband not doing anything, I asked, "Aren't you going to help with the move?" "Why should I? Aren't you the one handling it?" My husband got angry when he heard me speaking as if it were someone else's responsibility. I'm confused why he's getting mad when I don't even know when or where we're moving. Later on, whenever I had time, I started preparing for the move, but I packed our belongings separately. I was tired of my mother-in-law's attitude, and I was also feeling suspicious about my husband because of the new house. "When are we moving?" I asked my husband to confirm. "Just get ready, you don't need to know." "That's it," he replied. From conversations during meals, I gathered that the move was probably happening soon, but strangely, they're not telling me anything. Do they see me just as a housemate? I only found out about the move when the movers arrived. As I rushed, we started cleaning up the breakfast dishes. "Leave them. We'll buy new ones." "By the way, do you plan to move into the new house with us?" my mother-in-law asked. In that moment, I realized they were purposely excluding me from discussions of the new house's layout, and keeping me in the dark about the moving day was all part of their plan to kick me out of my in-laws' house. My husband, standing behind my mother-in-law and laughing, didn't say anything. He probably agrees with them. I had packed my things separately from my husband because I had a feeling this would happen. Now I'm being faced with hatred. From now on, only the family will live here. Do as you wish, my mother-in-law said, looking displeased. My sister-in-law, looking worried, probably thought I begged to come with them while crying. Not happy with my reaction, my mother-in-law snapped. Anyone who relies on someone else's earnings should leave now. James will build the new house and pay off the loan with his salary. We don't need a freeloader, she yelled angrily. I was actually the one planning to leave. When I heard about the mortgage repayment coming from my husband's salary, I had to hold back my laughter. It seemed my husband hadn't been informed by his mother about this plan. He looked surprised but realized he couldn't contradict his angry mother, so he just remained silent. It seemed his parents believed they wouldn't need to use their retirement money, and instead their son would pay off the loan and build a new house. I found it intriguing how they planned to handle the loan repayment, so I informed them with a smile, "Got it. I've decided to proceed with divorcing James." So I told them, "You all go ahead and move to the new house." My mother-in-law didn't like my reaction and started shouting, but my father-in-law and sister-in-law pulled her away, and they left the house. To my husband, who stayed behind, I said, "We'll bring the divorce papers later, so please give me your new address. I'm sure it's a splendid house. Since I haven't been informed at all, I'd like to see it." Reluctantly, my husband gave me the address. Since I didn't have many belongings, a friend helped me move them. Then, I changed all the public utility bills for my in-laws' house to my husband's name. I went back to my parents' house for the time being, and once I was settled, I went to the address my husband gave me to get his signature on the divorce papers. The new house where my husband and his family moved was indeed impressive. It was a grand 3-family home. As soon as my mother-in-law spotted me, she hurried over and yelled, "What are you doing here?" Ignoring her outburst, I asked my husband to sign the divorce papers. My mother-in-law then turned to him and said, "Useless wife. It's because she's not a government worker. Hurry up and say it." With a sarcastic tone, I turned to my mother-in-law and remarked, "What a splendid house. Are you sure you can afford it with James' salary?" My mother-in-law's face turned red with anger. "You're the outsider now, so don't concern yourself with us. Take the divorce papers and leave," she snapped. I wanted to savor the sight of my husband's pale face a little longer, but I grabbed the divorce papers and left immediately, keeping an eye on my furious mother-in-law. I went straight to the town hall to submit the papers and decided to start looking for a new place for myself. Feeling worn out from married life after that ordeal, I opted to live alone in a small apartment for a while. I found a property near my workplace that suited my needs, so I moved in right away and started afresh. Life became so much more comfortable without roommates boasting about being government workers or leaving all the chores to me. Just as I was starting to put my husband out of my mind, I suddenly received a call from an unfamiliar number. "I can't pay the loan, Julie. Will you come back to me?" "I'm calling from a friend's phone. I can't afford to pay the mortgage, electricity, water bills, or even my phone bill," my ex-husband said, his voice breaking with tears. I assumed he could ask his family for help, so I suggested, "Your sister has a stable job, and your parents are retired with pensions. They should have some savings, right?" When I dismissed his plea, my husband reluctantly confessed, "Actually, they don't have any savings left. My sister has debts and no extra money." Listening to my husband, it became clear that their retirement savings were nearly wiped out due to investment fraud, and his sister, who lived with their parents, had racked up significant debt by overspending on credit. This proud family of civil servants had nothing to hide. While I was living with them, they might have been able to keep it under wraps. But now that they've moved to a new house, they seem to be struggling to manage their lives and reach out to me out of desperation. However, I had no intention of reuniting with them. I declined their plea and ended the call. After that, the phone rang numerous times, but I continued to ignore it until the calls eventually ceased. Later, when I visited their new house, I noticed a for sale sign. There happened to be someone from the housing company there, so I couldn't resist asking about the in-law family. It turns out they sold the house immediately after it was built, but they still had a remaining loan. The housing company representative also mentioned, "I was surprised by that family. Despite their boasting, they said they would sell right away if they couldn't repay the loan because our relative was a cosigner. It seems to have caused some trouble." It seems that because a relative co-signed their loan, that relative had to take on the debt. Once this became known, considering their past boasting about being civil servants, it appears they're now facing ostracism from their relatives. It's not surprising, really. They cause trouble for a relative who works in a private company by involving them as a co-signer. As I relaxed on my sofa at home, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of imagining what my ex-husband and his family, who no longer had anyone to boast to about being civil servants and were now seen as a nuisance by their relatives, might be going through. Hey, this soup for breakfast doesn't taste great. It's too watery. Why is it like this? Yeah, it's not that good. Can you make it thicker? But remember, I need to be careful with salt, as the doctor said. Who cares about that? I really like strong flavors. The one who always complains about food is my mother-in-law, Mil. She always wants food with lots of seasoning, but she's overweight and has almost diabetes. Her doctor warned her, but she doesn't seem to care and adds extra seasoning to everything I cook. I was shocked by how much salt and pepper she added to the soup I'd made carefully. Even though I use salt and seasonings with less salt, it seems like it's never enough for her. I worry she might get really sick if she keeps eating like this. Honestly, I wouldn't be too upset if something happened to her. Mil seems to enjoy making things difficult for me. She's always complaining and being mean. My name's Alice, I'm 29 years old, and I work while also taking care of the house. I've been married for 3 years, but we don't have any kids. The problem is that I can't have children, and Mil never lets me forget it. You're worthless as a woman if you can't have children. You're broken, she'd say. You should be thankful just to be allowed in this house. You're right, I am broken because we've tried so many times and I can't have kids. Talk about getting a bad deal. Ha, how can you say that? My husband laughed. Well, because a woman who can't have kids is done for, Mil added. You're right, Mom, my husband agreed. That I'm broken. I really want a baby. I've been going to the doctor while working, trying everything, but nothing's working. It's exhausting, both physically and emotionally. So I've decided to stop the treatment. It's also expensive, and it's hard to keep going for years. My husband used to say spending money on fertility treatments was pointless. But he also pushed me to get pregnant quickly. Why bother pressuring me? I can't get pregnant just because you want me to, I thought to myself. After giving up on treatments, I thought about being happy with just my husband and me. But my mother-in-law still hoped for a grandchild to tease me about. She even bought diapers and proudly showed them off. Look, I got diapers, she said excitedly. You'll need them one day. Haha, aren't those a bit small for you, Mel? I joked back. Haha, hey, these are for a baby, can't you see that? She replied. Well, I wouldn't know. I'm the broken woman who can't have kids, I retorted sarcastically. That's enough. Angrily, my mother-in-law stormed off to her room. Thank goodness, I thought, already tired from work and not wanting to deal with her mean comments anymore. It seems like she has nothing better to do than make my life miserable. We moved in with my in-laws after my father-in-law passed away a year ago. My mother-in-law was heartbroken. Then, around the same time, she was warned by her doctor about her risk of diabetes. That's why we moved in. My husband wanted to support his mom, but despite having diabetes, she's okay as long as she takes her medication and eats well. There's nothing to worry about, well, except that she often forgets her meds and eats whatever she wants, so her condition might worsen eventually. Even if that happens, I really don't want to be responsible for taking care of my mother-in-law. I'm still working and really busy. Taking care of in-laws in my 20s? No thanks. The next day was my day off, so I was doing chores around the house. My mother-in-law, who usually just sits on the sofa snacking, suddenly got up and went into my room. I didn't want her in there, but my hands were full, so I didn't say anything. I cleaned your room for you, she said. Thanks, I replied, feeling suspicious. Maybe I should switch rooms with my husband. You know, if you leave your room messy, you'll attract bugs, she chuckled. Sure, enjoy your clean room, I replied, feeling unsure about her intentions. My mother-in-law seemed to think I was grateful, which only made her behavior more suspicious. I had a feeling she was up to something. That night, I decided to sleep in my husband's room. He'd been away on business since yesterday, so he wouldn't know. Even if he finds out, I knew he wouldn't be upset. So I made my choice. I work as a nurse with regular hours, so we have separate bedrooms. Part of it is because our relationship has cooled off. but mostly it's because I don't want to disturb him when I work night shifts. I waited until my mother-in-law went to her room, then I went to my husband's room. Okay, she's in her room, time for me to get some sleep too, I thought. And so, I ended up sleeping in my husband's room for 2 days. My mother-in-law started to get suspicious because I seemed too happy. She began asking strange questions. Are you sure you're not feeling any discomfort or anything? She asked. What do you mean? I replied, avoiding her gaze. Oh, never mind, she said, dropping the subject. Was there something she was wondering about? Avoiding eye contact, my mother-in-law ate her meal alone. I had the night shift that day, so I planned to relax at home before heading to work. But relaxing isn't really an option for me since my mother-in-law never helps around the house. She enjoys telling me what to do while she sits on the couch, eating snacks and reading Japanese comics for women. She's probably reading and plotting her next move to make her annoying daughter-in-law upset. I glanced at the cover of her comic. It was titled Epic Mother and Daughter-in-Law Swamp Battle in English. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at her choice of reading material. Eventually, my husband returned from his business trip, but it was already 10 p.m. GH. I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a bath, he said. Sure, I'll heat it up for you. Have a beer while you wait, I suggested. Thanks, I will. Oh wait, it's not safe to drink alcohol before taking a bath. Okay, I'll have a non-alcoholic beer then, he reluctantly agreed, listening to my advice about the dangers of mixing alcohol and hot water. You'd think he'd know better. Even saunas have signs warning against entering if you're drunk. But no, common sense isn't so common for him or my mother-in-law. After that, my husband took his bath and started singing loudly. We live in a single-family home, but singing at this hour. Our neighbors won't be pleased. La 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 la. Hey, you're too loud, I said. Shut it. You're the one being loud, he retorted. I quietly warned him to stop singing, but then my mother-in-law came into the bathroom area to join in. Joaquin is just trying to enjoy himself singing. What's wrong with that? She said. What? You really don't know how to treat your husband, do you? Always so inconsiderate and complaining, my mother-in-law scolded me. Hey, I'm not the one always complaining, Mill, I replied. Talking back, huh? You're definitely not cute. Not that you're a beauty to begin with, she sneered. That's okay with me. I probably look like a knockout beauty in some other country, no worries, haha. After that, my husband got out of the bath and started drinking. It was already 10:30 p.m., and I needed to leave for the hospital where I work. Even though it's close by, there's a lot to do, so I have to leave early. Oh, by the way, I've been sleeping in your room. Would you mind sleeping in mine tonight? My clothes are all over, I mentioned to my husband. Sorry, sure. Doesn't matter to me, he replied. Okay, I'm heading out then. Take care, I whispered to my husband so Mill wouldn't hear. Just as I was about to grab my bag and leave, I heard my husband let out a loud groan. What? Joaquin. He was curled up on the floor, holding onto his leg and moaning. He looked like he was in a lot of pain. Mill's face turned pale, and she started to panic. What's happening? Speak, she demanded. He couldn't say a word, no matter what I asked. There was no response. I felt like I needed to do something, but then I noticed something strange. The floor was unusually slippery. Even though I was wearing socks, it felt like I could easily fall. What on earth is this? I exclaimed. Joaquin, Mill, what did you do? I didn't do anything. It's not my fault, Mill protested. Blaming my mother-in-law wouldn't solve anything at that moment, so I immediately called an ambulance. My husband was taken straight to our hospital, and work was the last thing on my mind. Even after we arrived, he kept clutching his leg, visibly sweating in pain. It hurts so bad, Joaquin. Hang in there, please, I pleaded. Thankfully, a doctor was able to examine him, and he seemed a bit relieved. His leg was indeed broken, just as we suspected. It was a 5th metatarsal fracture, which made sense given how he slipped on that slick floor. His foot was visibly swollen. Usually, people get this kind of fracture by tripping or putting too much weight on it. Speaking from my own experience, I twisted my ankle falling downstairs years ago. I heard a loud snap, and the pain was unbearable. I was also diagnosed with a 5th metatarsal fracture. I was lost in music while walking downstairs, so it was quite embarrassing. I even lied to my close friends about it. Since his fracture didn't need hospitalization, my husband could come home. I was supposed to work a night shift, but my nursing supervisor insisted that I take the night off. It wasn't life-threatening, but I guess she was genuinely worried. I survived, but now I've got a fever, my husband remarked. Well, you broke your leg, so getting a fever isn't surprising. But why was the floor so slippery? Maybe we should ask Mill about that, huh? I suggested. Hey, what did you do to the floor in the room? I confronted Mill. Well, the floor was slippery. That's why I slipped and fell. I could have seriously hurt myself, my husband interjected. That room is for my daughter-in-law, so I greased the floor. What? I was hoping she would slip, so I put a lot of grease on the floor. I never expected you to go in there and slip, Mill confessed. Unbelievable, I exclaimed. It turns out my mother-in-law intentionally greased the floor to make me fall. She had claimed to have cleaned the room, but her actual intention was to harm me. I'm furious. If I had entered that room, I could have been seriously injured. Breaking a leg would be the least of my worries. Hitting my head could have been fatal. My mother-in-law's actions are practically criminal. You're despicable. You're not even family to me anymore. I got seriously hurt because of you. I'm going to the police, I declared. Wait a minute. I didn't directly cause any harm, did I? Your wife is the one to blame. She told you to enter her room, didn't she? So this is all her fault, Mill retorted. Shut up. That's not the point. You're getting arrested. My husband furiously dialed the police. My mother-in-law tried to snatch the phone away but couldn't overpower him, even with a broken leg. My husband was desperately holding onto his phone, talking to the police. I couldn't help but wish I was at work, or even at the hospital, instead of dealing with this mess. Neighbors will eventually hear about this horrifying situation. Since she almost injured me too, maybe I should also involve the police. We don't know for sure, but she might be charged with attempted harm. Wait now. I don't want to go to the police, Mill protested. Really? You knew the risks when you did this, or did you think you could just make me disappear from this world? I snapped. Well, I did think it would be better if you just disappeared. Wow, you're the worst. Your mindset is criminal. Personally, I wish you'd just stay in jail forever, Mill sneered. Let's get a divorce, I declared. What? I can't keep living like this. If I stay in this house, I might actually be in danger one day. I'm too scared to live with that. Plus, I can't tolerate your lack of morals anymore, I explained. Wait, please don't say we'll divorce over this, my husband pleaded. Over this, you belittled me, called me defective. Do you even realize how much that hurts? I can manage without you just fine, I stated firmly. No, I need you. I was depending on your income. I even signed a new car contract. I finally got the Toyota Century I've always wanted from Japan. My husband protested. I don't care anymore, I said, feeling determined. I managed to clean the slimy floor and quickly packed my belongings into a bag. I stuffed more into my carry-on, took off my wedding ring, and placed it on the table. While searching through a shelf full of dishes, I thought about bringing the divorce papers. Found it. The divorce papers you wrote before. Remember how you wrote that if I can't have a child within 2 years, we divorce? Thanks. I can't have children now, so let's divorce, I declared, holding the papers in my hand. You must feel relieved now, I added. Wait, what about the loan for my Century? My husband asked. Who cares? I replied dismissively. I left the house and went straight to the hospital. The compassionate charge nurse didn't ask many questions when I showed up. She seemed to understand I had my reasons. Being a nurse, I can support myself without relying on a husband. I wondered why I endured being treated poorly by my in-laws, enduring their mean comments. The whole situation felt ridiculous, so I decided to focus solely on my job and stop dwelling on it. The next morning, I filed for divorce, and he's now my ex-husband. Given the emotional pain he caused me, I consulted a lawyer about getting compensation. In the end, my ex-husband had to pay me, and I couldn't help but think serves you right. Since the police got involved, it seems the neighbors have been avoiding my mother-in-law because she blabbed about why my ex-husband broke his bone. Everyone thinks she's a terrible parent, which is understandable. My ex-husband no longer wants anything to do with her and seems to have kicked her out. Though there is some kind of survivor's benefit program, it doesn't pay much. She's been crying that living alone is impossible. She loves to eat, and because of her, our grocery bills were outrageous, so living on just the survivor's benefit would mean a very modest lifestyle. As for my ex-husband, I don't care what happens to him anymore. He mentioned something about taking out a car loan, but I have no idea what happened with that. I assumed he wouldn't be able to afford it on his salary. He took me for granted and thought I would contribute money too, which annoyed me so much. Even though he's not particularly wealthy, he's the type to buy a new car without thinking. Later, I started dating a doctor at the hospital, and 2 years after that, we got married and were blessed with a child, which felt like a miracle after all I'd been through. From now on, I'm committed to doing my best for my family, Steve said confidently. I built that house, so it belongs to me. Now you have to leave even though we're splitting up. I don't think you can manage on your part-time pay, Steve chuckled as he showed her the divorce papers. My name's Katie. I'm 33 years old. Recently, I got a job working part-time at a nearby supermarket. I married Steve 3 years ago after we met at work and both quit at the same time. I wanted to keep working after we got married, but he wanted me to stay home. So I became a full-time housewife, even though I really miss working. But I kept feeling like I wanted to work outside the house more and more. After a lot of talking, I finally got a part-time job. We want kids, but we haven't been able to have any yet. I really wanted a cat as a pet, but Steve really doesn't like them, so I sadly had to give up on the idea. Steve used to want me to stay home all the time, but he got mad when I started working part-time and started complaining about everything I did. You went to work again today, huh? Lately, it seems like the house is getting messier. Are the clothes all wrinkled in the laundry? You're not keeping up with the housework, Steve criticized. That wasn't true. I had finished cleaning before going to work, and the laundry was perfectly done. What are you talking about? I'm doing everything just like before. It's obviously clean, can't you see? I argued. He's complaining about the food again. Fried chicken, really? Can't you cook something different? He complained. I didn't make fried chicken that often, and I tried to make different meals every day despite having limited time. I put effort into making your favorite fried chicken, and I make a variety of dishes, I defended myself. But whenever I tried to speak up, he got even angrier. Are you saying you're too busy because of your part-time job? You're just pretending to be busy. Don't act like your job is important when it barely pays anything, he scolded. You're only working because you're selfish. Your earnings were fine to begin with. Make sure you do the housework properly. Don't make excuses about not having time. It's embarrassing to work so hard for such a low wage. Steve always insulted my job with hurtful words. He used to say he wanted me to be a housewife so people wouldn't think we were struggling financially. But he constantly belittled my part-time job, bragging about how he made enough money that we didn't need to worry about expenses. Being constantly insulted for my work with such cruel words was unbearable. Every day, his words made me furious. One day, we decided to go visit Steve's parents' house, where we hadn't been in a while. Even though I had been annoyed with Steve for a long time, I was glad to get out of the house for a change. I didn't know what would happen when we got to his parents' house. After driving for a few hours, we got to Steve's parents' house. His mom, who lived alone, welcomed us with a smile. After dinner, which she cooked, Steve went out to play slot machines. While washing dishes with my mother-in-law, her mood changed. She wasn't as calm as before, and her face looked serious. As I made coffee, wondering what was wrong, we sat on the sofa, and she started talking. Katie, according to Steve, you're working part-time. Why do you need to work when he has a good job? Also, he says you're not keeping up with the housework because you're too busy with your job, she said. I was taken aback by her sudden words. No, that's not true. I'm handling everything just fine, I responded. My mother-in-law acted surprised, saying, Oh, I've heard from Steve about how bad you are at housework. There's no point in lying. He's been dealing with this alone. He's exhausted from work, and it's sad that he has to come home to a messy house. You're not cooking proper meals, are you? Quit that part-time job. Your workplace won't miss you. They can find someone else. Your job is to take care of the house, okay? Focus on the house and support Steve properly from now on. Don't embarrass yourself as Steve's wife. My mother-in-law has traditional beliefs, thinking a wife should stay home. She got married right after school and never worked, always being a full-time housewife. Steve also grew up believing that's how a wife should be. That's why they both don't like the idea of me working outside. But my mother-in-law's words were too harsh. She not only dismissed my job. Those hurtful words really got to me. I was putting in so much effort at my part-time job, and everyone there was supportive and kind. It was a positive atmosphere, and I felt appreciated and relied upon. It broke my heart to hear myself talked about like I was useless, especially when my mother-in-law didn't even know anything about my job. And finding out that Steve had been saying bad things about me behind my back, despite me taking care of our home, was a shock. I was actually working harder than ever to make sure everything was in order, even with my part-time job. I knew Steve's job was tough, so I was doing my best to help out. But hearing him and his mother gossiping about me on the phone was hard to swallow. I didn't want to believe it. After hearing such awful things, I felt really down for a few days. But then, I remembered my father's face. Since my mother passed away, he'd been living alone in our family home. He lived a bit far from me, and I hadn't visited him recently because I'd been busy. I needed to hear his voice, so I called him. Usually he picks up right away, but that day, it rang for a long time. Just as I started to worry, he finally answered. "Katie, it's been a while. Are you well?" Hearing my father's calm voice, I felt a wave of relief, and tears began to flow. "What happened?" "It took you a long time to pick up the phone. If you're busy, I can call back later," I said. "No, I'm sorry. I recently fell down the stairs and hurt my back. I can't move around much now, but don't worry about me. I'll be okay soon. By the way, what's going on? Is everything okay?" he replied. I was really surprised. My dad, who used to be so active, had fallen down the stairs and hurt his back. "No, I'm okay. Just make sure you take care of yourself and get better soon. I'll come to visit you soon, so wait for me," I assured him. "Yeah, I'm okay," he said. But then I thought, he's already considered elderly and injuries might take longer to heal. I had always been reassured by his energy, but suddenly I felt worried. If he keeps using the stairs every day, he might slip again. Plus, the stairs in our old family home are a bit steep, and there are tall steps in the entrance and bathroom. I became really worried about my dad living there and taking care of his back. What if something bad happens and he gets seriously hurt? I couldn't just ignore it. I always thought it would be nice to live closer to him, but now I knew I had to act fast. I decided to build a safer, easier-to-use home for my dad nearby. I had some money from managing apartments that my grandfather left me. Originally, it was meant for my dad, but he put it in my name just in case. He told me to keep it quiet from my husband. I had saved all the rent money until now. I wanted to use that money to build a new house for my dad. I felt really happy thinking about giving him such a great gift, especially since I hadn't been able to do much to help him before. Building the house would cost a lot of money, and I couldn't just keep it a secret. I needed to talk to Steve about it. I was nervous he might not agree and might get upset, but instead he said, "I understand. It makes sense to get him a new house, especially considering his age. If you think you can handle it, go for it. Just don't expect me to help if things get tough." He insulted me again, which made me angry, but arguing would only make things worse. So I decided not to argue back this time. It made things simpler for me. I immediately started looking for a good contractor and began the process of building the new house. But it seemed like Steve wasn't happy with the idea of me actually going through with it. He didn't say anything, so I tried not to pay too much attention to it. But he usually wasn't the type to keep quiet. One day, I was shocked when I went to the bank to take out money for groceries. $3,000 was missing from our living expenses, all taken out at once. I couldn't remember spending such a big amount of money. There was only one person who could have done this. It was hard to believe that Steve would take the money without asking, but it was clear that the money was gone. That night, I confronted him. When I went to the bank today, I saw that $3,000 was taken out from our living expenses. "Do you know anything about this?" I asked. Steve arrogantly replied, "I gave it to my mother. You said you were going to build a house, so you must have been saving up somewhere, right? $3,000 isn't a big deal." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Why did you give her money? Your mother isn't exactly struggling, is she? And that's our living expenses. It's not fair to give away such a big amount without even talking to me about it," I argued. He snapped back. "What do you know about my mother? She said she needed help. What's wrong with a son helping his mother? Plus, that money was earned by me. How I use it is none of your business. If it bothers you, try earning as much as I do with your part-time job. You can't say anything now, can you? Don't ever complain about what I do again." After shouting at me, he stormed out of the room. I always believed Steve wouldn't betray me, even with his harsh words. It would have been better if he had talked to me about it. Maybe there could have been a better way to help his mother without causing this argument. Did he think I'd say no, or did he not trust me? Instead of our marriage making us closer, it felt like we were growing apart. Steve didn't see anything wrong with using the money without asking. The next day, he acted like nothing happened and went to work after breakfast. I didn't say more because I didn't want another fight, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Meanwhile, the new house was finally done. Despite the business, the construction company was really helpful and I managed to build a beautiful house. I asked my dad to pack some of his things, but I didn't want him to strain himself, so I hired movers to handle it all for him. With just 2 weeks left until moving day, I was filled with joy thinking about how I could do something special for my dad in the house I had built. On the day we planned to help my dad unpack in the new house, along with Steve, I tried to talk about the arrangements, but then Steve said something shocking. "Hey, that house isn't for your dad. It's going to be for my mom. I have the right to decide who lives in the house I helped build, so it's going to be my mom," he said firmly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In a panic, I replied, "I built that house. It's for my dad. There's no way you, with your part-time job, could have built it. It's my money that paid for it, so don't act so entitled." It seems like he genuinely believed that it was his money that built the house. When we talked about building it before, he seemed fine with the idea. But now it looks like he planned from the start to make it for his mother, not my dad. That's really unfair. Now I have to prove that I used my own money to build it. I had no choice but to tell him about the rental income I kept hidden until now. I decided to come clean about it. "You're making up stories just because you want the house for yourself. If you're going to lie, at least make it believable," he scoffed. He didn't believe me at all and stormed off somewhere. I was at a loss, but I had to make him understand. While waiting for him to return, he came back looking incredibly angry and then said, "You tried to trick me, saying you built that house. You're a liar. That house is mine because I helped build it. You need to leave, even if we break up. I don't think you can survive on your part-time salary." I was speechless at the sudden turn of events. That house was built with my hard work, and being told to leave so abruptly was too much. "Sign this and get out tonight," he laughed as he slammed divorce papers on the table and headed to his room. His part was already filled out. After constantly putting me down, presenting the divorce papers like that was the lowest he could go. He must have done this awful thing to make me feel hopeless. Maybe he thought bringing up divorce would make me cave in and let his mother live in the house. But little did he know, I had enough money to live on my own without him. This was the final straw for me. I signed the papers and submitted them, then quickly packed my bags and left for my dad's house. My dad was surprised to see me arriving with so much luggage all of a sudden, but he warmly welcomed me in. After I explained everything that had happened, he patted my back and said, "You've been through a lot. You can stay with me in the new house." That would make me happy. Moving day came and everything went smoothly because I was there. We successfully moved in without any issues. I found it a bit strange that my ex-husband hadn't reached out after causing such a scene, claiming the house was his. But I tried not to worry about it because I didn't want to think about someone I was divorced from. A few days after settling into our new home with my father, something unbelievable happened. There was a commotion outside, and when I looked out the window, I saw a big moving truck parked outside, claiming they were moving into our house. I rushed outside to talk to the movers and figure out what was going on. It turned out that the customer was actually my ex-husband, and he was planning to move in with his mother. They wanted to forcefully take over the house where my father and I were already living. Since we were divorced, he was basically a stranger to me now, and it would be a big problem if they just showed up like that. I felt a chilling kind of fear about my ex-husband's aggressive intentions. I explained the situation to the confused movers and asked them to stop their work. Then I talked to my father and quickly called the police. When I told the police what was happening, they confirmed that the house was my property. Since my ex-husband and I were divorced, he had no right to live there, and entering against my will could be considered trespassing. Soon, my ex-husband and his mother arrived. When they saw the police, they started to panic. It finally dawned on him that I was the one who built the house. But with his mother freaking out beside him and the police bombarding him with questions, he lost his cool and yelled, "What's going on? Why can't I live in this house?" Looking at him, I realized I was done dealing with such a person. But to protect my father and myself, I handed over the final piece of evidence to the police. Although the situation calmed down thanks to their intervention, I later heard that my ex-husband faced serious consequences. He was so serious about living in the house that he canceled his apartment lease and even sold his mother's house, leaving him with no place to go. With a breach of contract fee demanded by the movers and a truckload of belongings, he found himself stranded on the street with his mother. The final piece of evidence I gave to the police was footage of the verbal abuse, essentially domestic violence, that my ex-husband subjected me to. Unable to endure his abusive language any longer, I had installed surveillance cameras to record everything. The footage showed me diligently doing housework while he constantly spewed unreasonable abuse. Using this evidence, I managed to further corner him. I hired a lawyer and sued him, eventually extracting a settlement. The expenses from the moving chaos and the settlement depleted the money he got from selling his mother's house and his own savings. Now he and his mother are reportedly living in a rundown apartment. Word of this spread quickly at his workplace. Realizing there was something wrong with his character, his colleagues distanced themselves, and now he is isolated and frowned upon by everyone at the company. As for me, I finally got to adopt a cat. My father's back has completely healed, and we're discussing taking a trip with the cat. I also used the settlement money to open a shop dealing with cat goods. It was challenging at first, and there were failures, but gradually customers increased and the business is thriving. Every day is peaceful and truly enjoyable. I never thought that the action I took for my father's sake would lead to my own happiness. I truly feel that it was the right decision. Recently, there has been a happy development. A man who always comes to my shop and chats pleasantly has been particularly kind to both people and cats. We've made plans to go for a drive together. I'm going to live my life freely and enjoyably. I'm excited about the new happiness that's about to begin. I got a call from my self-centered sister-in-law out of the blue. She told me she left her baby at our doorstep and asked me to take care of it for a week. But there was a big problem. I had moved out of that house just the day before. When I told her this, she started yelling at me, saying she was overseas and demanding that I find the baby immediately. I panicked and drove back to the old house. But there was no baby to be found. I realized I needed to call the police. As I dialed the number with shaky hands, I remembered something truly shocking. I've been married to Scott for 10 years, but we never had children. I'm 38 now, and my younger sister-in-law, Lindsay, who's 5 years younger, often takes advantage of me. Her husband is a big shot, and mine works for him, so Lindsay always asks me to do things for her. It's usually just a quick drive away. But ever since she got pregnant, she's been making more demands, even making me clean and cook for her. I love helping people, but I've been telling my husband that Lindsay is being too selfish. He keeps asking me to help her out a bit longer, promising he'll talk to her husband about it. But it seems like he's influenced by Lindsay's husband too. So reluctantly, I keep going to Lindsay's whenever she calls. Oh, my stomach feels so heavy. Michelle, can you grab the TV remote for me? Huh? What? Even though she was only 3.5 months pregnant, her belly looked bigger than expected. But she was naturally a bit plump, so I didn't say anything. Maybe it'd be good for your health to move around a bit, I suggested. Don't tell me what to do when you've never been pregnant, she snapped back. Taking care of this baby is important for our future. What's wrong with that? She lounged on the couch, keeping her arrogant attitude, which started getting on my nerves. But when I questioned if you could know the baby's gender at 3.5 months, she got angry. You're so old-fashioned. Nowadays, you can find out the gender early, Lindsay insisted, and I didn't feel like arguing, so I just listened to her complaints. You're just jealous because you can't have a baby. It's not good for the baby's development. If anything happens, it's your fault. She started using the unborn baby to threaten me, making it hard to be around her. I quickly finished my tasks and leave feeling suffocated by Lindsay's behavior. When I talked to my husband after work, he comforted me, saying just hang in there a little longer. But despite his words, I still felt uneasy. It was hard to keep feeling this way. I started making excuses whenever Lindsay called, avoiding her requests. But then she complained to my husband, saying I was being mean to her, which left me feeling lost. Even when I said I was busy, she ignored it and kept calling. Eventually, I had to pick up, and she screamed at me, threatening my brother's job at the company, reminding me that her husband was the president. My husband, always gentle and trying to avoid trouble, urged me to go to Lindsay's place. Time went by, and Lindsay gave birth to a boy a month early. The baby weighed over 140, which seemed big for a premature birth. But not knowing much about pregnancy, I accepted it. Lindsay named him Chris, and after she left the hospital, she called me to take care of him, saying it would be good practice for when I had my home. Despite my annoyance with Lindsay, I visited her every time she called, thinking she must be struggling after giving birth. Plus, Chris was just too cute. Chris, you're such a good boy. Grow up healthy. Changing diapers and bathing him didn't feel like a chore when I saw his face. But after 3 months, Lindsay started leaving Chris at my house more often. What's going on? You're all dressed up, I asked. I have a dinner with people from my husband's work. You take care of Chris while I'm out, she said, as she regained her strength. I realized how busy the wife of a president could be, and I took care of the baby diligently, but Lindsay started leaving Chris with me more often. Thanks for today. Isn't this too much? Are you just accompanying your husband? My husband is handling an important deal, and I'm helping out. You should too, Lindsay said, forcing Chris onto me and rushing out. I couldn't help but wonder if she was really helping with that flimsy dress she was wearing. Despite my doubts, I couldn't ignore the baby, so I took care of him as usual. But that day was different. When I changed his diaper, Chris had diarrhea. He seemed energetic and didn't have a fever, so I made sure to keep the room warm. In the evening, when Lindsay came to pick up Chris, I told her about it. She accused me loudly, saying I did something to Chris out of spite. I denied it, just as my husband Scott came home. What's all this noise in the entryway, Scott? I trusted your wife with Chris, and now he has diarrhea, Lindsay said, her usually harsh tone turning meek as she started crying. I understand your concern, but Michelle doesn't have much experience with babies. It might have just been a bit cold today. I'll apologize on her behalf, so please forgive her, my husband defended me. I felt puzzled why I had to apologize when I hadn't done anything wrong. I saw Lindsay and Chris off, feeling frustrated. While making dinner in a low mood, my husband suddenly got serious and took out an envelope from his bag. Michelle, we need to talk about something important. Dinner can wait. Please sit down, he said, spreading out documents on the table. The words he told me were shocking, something I never imagined. But seeing his determination, I nodded quietly. A week later, while I was unpacking boxes, Lindsay called. I left a bag at your entrance. Take care of him for a week. What? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. It's my baby, of course. You've already brought him inside, haven't you? After hearing the whole story, it turned out that since I wasn't home, she had put Chris in a bag and hung it on the doorknob. Hearing this, I panicked. Wait a minute. We moved out yesterday. We're not going back to that house. Please go and pick up Chris right away. But Lindsay didn't believe me, saying, What? Lying again. When I insisted it was true, she suddenly panicked. It turns out she left Chris 5 hours ago. Plus, I was shocked to learn she was currently on an overseas trip. Despite it being spring, it was still chilly outside. Go pick up Chris now. Hurry up. More worried about the baby than angry at Lindsay, I immediately drove off. An hour later, I arrived at our old house and checked the entrance, but there was no sign of Chris. I checked the garden thoroughly and asked the neighbors. But no one saw anything, I said, feeling frustrated. I thought no crying or injuries either. What's happening? Feeling hopeless without any clues, I was about to call the police when my phone rang. What? What did you say? The call was so shocking that I couldn't even speak. After hanging up, I was so stunned that I just wandered around until Lindsay called. He was in the eco bag at the entrance, right? He's not there. I can't find him anywhere. This is bad. If we don't find Chris, my husband might divorce me. It'll be your fault if we don't find him, Lindsay said, her voice trembling with panic over the phone. Since there was nothing else to do, I told her I would report to the police and ask for help. But she adamantly refused. Doing that will make it a big deal, and my husband will find out. Chris' safety is more important than your reputation. Chris is just a tool to extract money from my husband, Lindsay said, revealing her selfishness, unconcerned about me. I could hear Lindsay talking with someone else. Later she said, This trip is ruined. I couldn't get a flight today, but I'm coming back tomorrow. Don't tell my husband anything. If you find Chris, contact me immediately. I'll do what I can. After I agreed, Lindsay hung up. The next day at the airport, Lindsay arrived with a man, looking displeased. "Michelle, what are you doing here? Did you find Chris? I came to tell you something important. Chris has gone somewhere you can't reach." "It's too late," Lindsay said, panicking as I looked sad. "You're lying. What am I supposed to tell my husband, you useless thing? Find a baby that looks like him right now. How can you say that? Are you even a mother?" Lindsay suggested finding a baby of the same age to deceive her husband. Overwhelmed with anger and sadness, tears started to flow. But I wiped them away and met her gaze firmly. "Instead of looking for a similar child, talk to this person," I said, as a woman hiding behind me, her face covered by a deep hood, revealed herself. Both Lindsay and the man with her started trembling. Yes, this woman was the wife of Lindsay's affair partner. The man was too shocked to move as his wife confronted him, yelling, "You scum, I'll knock some sense into you." He pleaded pathetically, "Please forgive me." But his wife was unforgiving, telling him bite down hard, and then slapped him repeatedly. The force was so strong that passersby stopped to watch. After leaving the man collapse and clutching his cheek, she turned to face Lindsay. Lindsay quickly begged and started talking fast. "Listen, don't get it wrong. We're not in that kind of relationship." "What? Hey, Michelle, stop recording with your smartphone," Lindsay snapped, seeing me recording the scene. But I remained calm. "Then how do you explain this?" I pulled out an envelope containing emails between Lindsay and her affair partner, along with cozy photos of them from social media. Lindsay tried to grab them from me, glaring menacingly. "Snooping like that is despicable. How did you find his wife's contact information?" "I actually met his wife by chance," I said. When I saw Lindsay's affair partner on social media, his face seemed familiar. After thinking, I realized he was the husband of the woman who works at my regular hair salon. He too was a hairstylist, but unlike his successful wife, who owned several shops and was skilled, he was known for not working and just playing around. He was a typical husband living off his wife's success. When I told his wife about Lindsay's affair trip, she said, "I've reached my limit. I'm joining in." She came with me, and I was honestly surprised at how terrifying she could be when angry, considering she's usually gentle and kind. The Playboy hairstylist couldn't stand up to his wife and kept begging, "Please don't divorce me." Watching her steadfast refusal, I felt determined. Plus, I started to wonder if Chris was born from the affair. "What? Don't make things up without proof," Lindsay said. "But he was born a month early and weighed over 140 grams. That's definitely too big. Have you been fudging the weeks?" I pulled out another envelope and showed her the documents inside. One was a maternal and child health handbook. Another proved that Lindsay's husband wasn't Chris' biological father. "You played dirty, but tearing this up won't erase what happened." Lindsay snatched the DNA test results from my hand and tore them up, looking pleased. But that wasn't going to let her off the hook. "You better talk directly to the person who gave me these documents," I said, showing Lindsay my smartphone. Her eyes widened, and she looked like she was about to scream. No wonder, the screen showed Lindsay's husband. I wasn't recording. I was on a video call with Lindsay's husband. "Lindsay, you lied about going to your parents' house and deceived me," he said. Lindsay stammered, not making much sense in response. Standing in front of her, I began to speak slowly. "Listen carefully. I'm going to explain everything step by step." A week ago, her husband, suspecting something, had requested a DNA test between himself and Chris. He also lied about going on a business trip for a week to monitor her actions. Lindsay, unaware of this, immediately contacted her lover by email and booked an overseas trip in a rush. She didn't even think to erase her browsing history on the day of the trip. After leaving Chris in an echo bag at the entrance of the house I was living in, Lindsay went off to the station humming a tune. Your husband followed her and took care of Chris. If he had been left at the entrance for over 5 hours, who knows what could have happened. What? So Chris is alive? Lindsay's husband exclaimed. Yes, he's with me now. The call I was about to make to the police when I couldn't find Chris was from Lindsay's husband. Surprised but eager to understand the situation fully, I immediately went to his house. Chris was full of energy, playing with a rattle. While hearing about the past events, I remembered that despite being born a month early, he weighed over 140 ounces. At the time, I reluctantly accepted it, but I indeed thought it was strange. With Lindsay's husband's permission, I searched through Lindsay's belongings and found her maternal and child health handbook. Looking at its contents, I discovered that Lindsay had falsified the baby's weeks. Why did Lindsay do such a thing? Looking back at the actual timing of her pregnancy, it was exactly when her husband was away on a long business trip for about 2 months. Therefore, it was impossible for him to be the father of the baby. Realizing that she was pregnant with her lover's child, Lindsay thought she could deceive everyone by fudging the birth month, especially since the baby turned out to be unexpectedly big. That's when I became suspicious. The person who was in love, and now everyone knows about the child, started saying sorry a lot to their wife. But their wife said coldly, "You'll have to manage on your own now," and gave them divorce papers. Then she kicked her crying husband and left. She walked away with confidence. Meanwhile, Lindsay's husband didn't stay quiet. He said, "I'm divorcing you, obviously. Go be with that other man." "No, I just thought he looked nice. He doesn't have any money. You were only with me for the money, right?" Lindsay got emotional as she admitted the truth. "You said Chris was just a way to get money from your husband." "Don't talk nonsense. I heard about your phone call yesterday from Michelle. I had recorded everything to make sure Lindsay couldn't deny it later." Lindsay's husband had been quietly listening until then, his face red with anger. When Lindsay was confronted with the truth, she seemed a bit scared at first. Then she looked at her phone and said, "If Chris is fine, then everything's okay, right? And even though he's not your biological child, I gave birth to him, so he's like your child." Both Lindsay's husband and I were shocked by her selfish reasoning. Thinking she had cleverly avoided the issue, Lindsay looked proud. But then her husband said, "It's over," and hung up the phone suddenly. Lindsay tried to call him back, but he had blocked her. Then I reminded her that leaving Chris alone in a bag and going out was against the law. She shook her head in disbelief. I showed her the law on my phone, and she suddenly got scared and collapsed. "Lindsay, it's over between us. Goodbye." Giving Lindsay a cold glance, I walked away, feeling a shiver down my spine. When I looked back, I saw Lindsay's eyes were red, and she had a scary expression on her face. "I'll tell Scott you're to blame for all of this because you moved without telling me. My husband decided to move because he felt sorry for me being used by you. He knows everything about what happened, and he never wants to see you again." Lindsay thought her brother would support her, but when she realized he had left her too, she screamed loudly. It's shocking how selfish someone can be, not once considering Chris. "Stop crying and go get Chris right now. If I'm getting divorced, I don't need the baby. What kind of person are you? I won't forget what you said. Chris will never go back to you, no matter what." After cutting ties with my sister-in-law for good, I walked away with a strong determination. Later, I reported Lindsay's cruel act of abandoning the baby to the police. Although Chris was quickly kept safe, what Lindsay did was considered too heartless, and she faced serious consequences from the police. Lindsay ended up getting divorced by her husband and rejected by her own family, leaving her completely alone. She was sued by her ex-husband for leaving the baby and deceiving him, and he demanded $30,000 in compensation. Lindsay and her lover had to borrow money to pay the settlement, and because they'd borrowed from a sketchy company, Lindsay had to work in a shady place to pay off the debt. My determination was to raise Chris as my own child. When I shared this with my husband, he happily agreed. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, I'm also expecting a new baby. I'll take care of these children with love and make sure they have a happy and free life. "Just leave. Go away." The person yelled angrily. "Stand still outside, you silly, useless old lady. I'm feeling really cold. Can you please open the door?" The next morning, my son's wife was found outside, feeling very cold. "My name is Lucy. I'm 60 years old and I take care of the house. My husband died a few years ago. Now my son Tom, his wife Mary, and my grandson Alan live with me. We came together after my husband passed away, but I tried to give them space so I wouldn't bother them. They thought it would be too much if we were too close all the time, so they made changes to the house for more privacy. Mary is friendly and likes to spend time with her friends. Maybe it was better for us to not see each other often. Alan, my grandson, is in 4th grade. Sometimes I look after him when Mary goes out. He's really cute. Tom works at night, so we don't see each other much. He and Mary never argued, and they went out together sometimes. So I thought everything was fine with their marriage. Mary has lots of friends and throws parties at our house often. She stays close with her mom friends from Alex's school, and they all come over on Fridays for a party. These parties bothered me a lot. They started in the evening and went late into the night with loud noise and people drinking. Sometimes the husbands of Mary's friends would get drunk too. They didn't care if Alan got tired or hungry, so he'd often come to my room when he was bored. Once someone got hurt and an ambulance had to come because they fell into broken glass. Another time, a fight got so bad that they almost called the police. It was always me who had to calm Alan down and say sorry to the neighbors the next day for the trouble. Mary liked having these parties and didn't want them to stop. I thought about talking to Tom about it, but since he worked at night on Fridays, he never saw what was happening, and I didn't feel comfortable bringing it up with him. I once told Mary how worried I was about Alan. I'm concerned about all the chaos on Fridays. I don't want any emergencies. It's not good for Alan. I'll take care of him on Fridays, so why don't you all go out to a restaurant and drink responsibly? Living together stresses me out more than you realize. Wouldn't you feel the same if you were me? Also, going out to drink costs more money than doing it at home. I can't tell your friends they can't come here. You don't understand how I feel. She got really mad and wouldn't talk to anyone. Then one Friday, Alan came home from school feeling tired. He had a fever of 100 degrees when I checked. Of all days, it's Friday. Everyone will be here soon. Why don't you go to your room and rest so you don't bother us? Can't we just cancel for today? I didn't say everything I wanted to. I can take care of Alan today, Mary. Is that okay? I offered, but she declined, probably sensing my frustration. It's fine, she replied. You don't need to worry. We're not that noisy. Why does it always fall on moms when a kid gets sick? I didn't mean to blame her, but I had to say something. If you start feeling worse, come to my room, I told Alan. I have some TV shows we can watch tonight. I'll be up late. Thanks, Grandma, he said. I'll be okay. I started to feel a bit calmer, but it was still a big day. The noise from their gathering was loud even from my room. Then there was a soft knock on my door. My heart raced with worry about Alan. I hurried to open the door, and there he was, looking upset. Can I stay with you tonight? He asked, tears in his eyes. I can't sleep because my head hurts. Even when I cover my ears, it's still so noisy. I quickly brought him into the room and gave him a drink, which he drank in one go, probably because he was thirsty. His hands felt really warm. So I checked his temperature, and it had gone up to 102. I was furious for the first time in a while. But I held back because taking care of Alan was more important than arguing with Mary. Alan still had a fever the next morning and looked just as sick. Alan looks really sick, so I think we should take him to the hospital this morning, I suggested, because most hospitals only see patients in the morning on Saturdays. But Mary couldn't get out of bed, probably because she had been up late drinking the night before. Don't worry, it'll get better soon. You'll be fine, right? She said, still half asleep and not even looking up from her bed. Alan replied, but it was clear he wasn't okay. He's had asthma since he was little, so he's more likely to have asthma attacks when he's sick. As I watched him, worried he might have an attack, he started to wheeze, just like I had feared. Mary, I think Alan's having an asthma attack. Where's his medicine? I asked, but Mary was fast asleep and didn't respond. Okay, I'm taking him to the emergency room, all right? I repeated several times before I took Alan to the hospital. Thankfully, they were able to give him inhalation and medication, and I felt a huge relief seeing Alan feeling better. When Mary woke up that evening, she exploded. Don't be selfish. He didn't need to go to the hospital. How much did going to the emergency room cost you? I can't believe it. I tried to talk to you so many times, but you were too drunk to wake up. Can't you just stop drinking when Alan is sick? He was in a lot of pain. Fever is normal for kids, and it's already gone, so it wasn't a big deal. Asthma flare-ups happen too. Don't spoil him just because he's your grandson. I thought I should tell Tom about it, so I did, but he said, but Alan is okay now, right? Don't worry too much about a kid's cold. Mary's dealing with a lot of stress from our living situation, so please try to be patient with her. It's important for you to take a step back since you all live together. I got the message loud and clear, but I didn't have much to say in response to his comments about the stress of living together. Tom was at work one day towards the end of the year when he suddenly needed surgery. He ended up spending the week in the hospital, including over the holidays. I'm thinking about spending this New Year's holiday at my parents' house for the first time in a while, Mary mentioned one day. Usually, our family spent New Year's cleaning up, enjoying our favorite foods, and going out to eat with my eldest daughter Emily and her family, who live nearby. I knew there was some distance between Mary and her parents, so I wondered what had changed. But if she could feel refreshed at her parents' place, that would be great for me. And I knew it would make Alan happy to spend time with his loving relatives. That sounds wonderful. Are you going to bring Alan with you? I'm sure your parents would be thrilled to see him. I'll bring him along while I'm there. Can you keep an eye on Tom? Of course. Aside from checking on Tom, I'll be spending New Year's alone this year. If you're going to be alone for the holidays, why don't you come to our house this year? Emily suggested. So I decided to accept her invitation. On New Year's Eve, both Mary and I were supposed to leave the house. I found myself sweating as I cleaned that day. Maybe it was because I was getting older, but cleaning felt like a task I had been avoiding for too long. Mary was out in the morning doing some shopping, so I tried to do as much cleaning as I could by myself. When Mary returned from shopping, she seemed a bit restless, fiddling with her watch. Lucy, when are you planning to leave? She asked. Aren't you done yet? Well, I'm not sure. I haven't really set a time. I've done quite a bit, but I might not finish everything now. What about you? When are you planning to leave? If you go first, I'll make sure all the doors are locked and everything before I leave. I was sweating a lot from all the cleaning and had only thin clothes on. So when I got thrown out into the yard, I felt really cold and shivery, especially with the snow falling. Mary, let me back in. I haven't had a chance to change my clothes. I'm freezing out here. Why are you taking so long? Just go already. My coat had been thrown out with my belongings, so I put it over my sweaty t-shirt for some extra warmth. I couldn't get back into the house because both the front door and the kitchen door were locked. I called out to Mary for a while, but she didn't answer, so I gave up. With no other choice, I decided to take a train to Emily's house. When I arrived, Emily was surprised to see me in such light clothes. What's wrong? Why are you dressed like that? She asked with concern. Come inside quickly. You'll catch a cold. Have you seen Bob? He was worried about you because of the snow, so he went to pick you up. He said he texted you. It was only then that I realized I had left my phone at home. Emily's son, Bob, is a college student, and I felt bad because he had driven all the way there to pick me up, and we missed each other. Emily texted Bob to let him know that I had arrived by train. That's when Bob shared something shocking with us. I tried calling you several times, but you never answered. Then I heard a phone ringing from inside the house. I thought you might be sick, so I went in. Strangely, the front door was unlocked. I found your phone in the living room, but when I heard noises from upstairs, I got worried and went to check it out. It makes sense for Bob to be concerned, especially with the unlocked door, I commented. Then I saw Mary and some man I didn't know hovering in the bedroom, Bob added. What? But Mary was supposed to be at her parents' house with Alan. I exclaimed, surprised by the unexpected revelation. I was stunned and stood still for a moment. Suddenly, they leaped off the balcony and disappeared into the yard, covered in a comforter. I ran after them and searched the yard, but they were gone. They had escaped. You let them get away? Emily asked incredulously. I don't think they got hurt. There were bushes and snow on the ground, I explained. I locked the second-floor door and was about to leave when I heard a noise from the next room and found Alan. Alan was small enough to hide behind Bob, Emily remarked. I'm sorry, my mom told me not to leave my room until after the new year. Alan was in his room surrounded by snacks and juice. I brought Alan here because I thought he'd have more fun and be more comfortable, Mary explained. I made sure to lock the front door. The spare key is under the flower pot. I'm glad nothing has changed since I was a kid. You did a good job of locking the door, Mom. It's time to talk to Tom about the future. Let's play some games, Alan. The two happily left the room. I'm not interested in Mary's affair right now. They can work it out on their own, but I can't forget what she did to Alan, I muttered. We spent the night relaxing with Emily and the others because it was already late. The next morning, Emily, Bob, and I returned home. We decided to leave Alan with Emily's husband. When we arrived home, we saw Mary standing at the front door. She was barefoot, trembling, and wrapped in a comforter. Aha, there you are. You locked me out, she exclaimed. Mary shivered in the cold, her teeth chattering as we went into the house to warm up. At that moment, I couldn't even bring myself to speak to her. But eventually, once Mary had stopped shivering, I decided to break the silence. I heard from Bob. "Who were you with on the second floor?" I asked. "What are you talking about? You must have the wrong idea," Mary replied defensively. "And Bob, what were you doing breaking into someone's house? Why didn't you use the intercom?" I added. "I noticed a pair of men's shoes near the entrance, but are those Tom's?" "Let me go ask him," I said. Well, there was actually a burglar in the house," Mary admitted hesitantly. I was about to explode with anger when something surprising happened. It was a close call. "That's serious. I think we should call the police," Emily suggested, pulling out her phone. "Wait, I see what you're trying to do. All right, you caught me. So who is that man?" I demanded. Mary hung her head in silence. "Weren't you two together when you jumped off the balcony? What happened to him? Where is he?" I pressed further. "He left a while ago," Mary replied quietly. She seemed shocked to be abandoned by the man she was having an affair with. She had spent the whole night barefoot, wrapped in a comforter, while he had gone home. "Oh, so he left you? That's unfortunate." Bob's words struck a nerve, and Mary's face flushed with embarrassment. "How could you neglect Alan like that? Were you planning to lock him in the room while you had your fun? I'm not interested in your affair, but I can't forgive you for what you did to Alan." I expressed my anger. I agree with her. At his age, he can manage on his own just fine. I'm his mother, but that doesn't mean I have to prioritize him over everything else in my life. I have my own things to do. Just because he's my son doesn't mean he can interfere. Mary defended herself, shocking Emily, Bob, and me with her callousness. "Tom will be coming home from the hospital soon. Alan and I were supposed to stay at Emily's house until then. But when the time came for Tom to be released, we decided to have the discussion at our house. However, I didn't want Alan to be there in case Mary said something hurtful to him. So I let him have some fun with Bob," I explained. When Tom arrived, Emily laid out the facts plainly. "Mary, is this true?" Tom asked, clearly shocked. "Well, you were busy with work, and I was lonely. I'm sorry," Mary admitted, her voice shaking. "Mary, did you really lock my mom out of the house in the snow?" Tom asked, seeking clarification. "No, that's not what happened." "And what about locking Alan in the room while you were having an affair?" I interjected, unable to contain my anger. "Tom, didn't Mom tell you about the Friday night parties? Why didn't you and Mary talk about it?" Alan spoke up, surprising us all with his maturity. "I'm not sure how to approach it, but the important thing is to never hesitate to ask for help. I've been exhausted from work too, and it's been tough. And I'm sure Mary has her own issues living with Mom. You two seem to avoid facing problems and take the easy way out. Have you ever thought about others? You need to talk it out and figure out what you're going to do together. You're both adults. But remember, you have to consider Alan. I won't let you abandon him." Tom addressed the situation calmly. A few days later, they decided to get divorced. Mary was ordered to pay child support and alimony to Tom, who got custody of Alan. Mary confessed everything, and the divorce proceeded smoothly. We never found out who she was cheating with. Mary refused to talk about it, and Tom was too focused on building a new life for himself and Alan to dwell on it. But 3 months later, the other man's family found out about the affair, and we learned his identity. To my surprise, the other man was married to one of Mary's mom friends. He was one of the men who sometimes attended the Friday night parties. He and Mary continued their relationship even after she divorced Tom. The reason Mary agreed to the divorce so easily was that she didn't want anything about the parties to be revealed. I can't understand how she could stay with someone who left her out in the cold like that, I mused. Despite having to pay child support and alimony, Mary stayed with him. The other man's wife demanded alimony and that Mary cut ties with him. As I pondered, I couldn't shake off the thought of the unlocked front door that day. They had been so preoccupied with their affair that they forgot to lock it. If it had been locked, Bob would have definitely used the intercom. I told Bob that even if the door was unlocked and he suspected there was a burglar, he shouldn't have gone in because he could have been in danger. "I was worried about Grandma," Alan explained. "Those two would have been in for a surprise if a cop had shown up out of nowhere and caught them cheating. I'm not experienced enough," Bob admitted. "Well, he can be a bit of a goofball, but he always tries to lighten the mood and treats Alan like his own brother," Emily explained, acknowledging Bob's loyalty. Mary had a wide circle of friends, and news of the affair spread quickly among them. Eventually, she left the area, probably finding it too difficult to stay in the same city. It seemed that her group of friends gave them a hard time until they decided to move. They're trying to make ends meet in their new place. They have to support Alan, pay alimony to Tom, and also pay alimony to his ex-wife. Mary's relationship with her parents is strained, and she's working tirelessly with no support, I explained. She called our house once. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm lonely and I'm struggling because I have no one to turn to. Please forgive me. Please help me." It's one thing to want to see or talk to Alan, but it's another to try to avoid taking responsibility for what she did, I thought bitterly. The children of Mary's friends gave Alan a hard time for a while because of Mary's actions. Tom managed to talk to their parents and the kids, and they were able to resolve things among themselves. But I can't help but wonder how much it hurt Alan to have his mother disappear and then be bullied by his own friends, I said sadly. I thought about telling Mary how much Alan is struggling, but I doubt she would care, I admitted. "Is that all you wanted to say?" Emily asked. "Don't contact me," I replied firmly before hanging up the phone. I've moved in with Tom and Alan. There have been challenges, and there will be more to come, but we'll face them together. Tom has also cut back on his work hours to spend more time with Alan. I'm grateful to Emily and her family for all their support during this time, I concluded gratefully. Emily said many things I should have said. Bob cares deeply for Alan, and they've become like brothers. I hope Alan will be raised in a loving family. I'm glad I get to be here to see him grow up. I added with a hint of hope for the future. You're not our family. Go home now. On our way to a camping trip with my husband Joseph and his parents, we stopped at a rest area off the highway. As I stepped out of the RV, Joseph abruptly hurled those hurtful words at me. "What?" I exclaimed, bewildered. This wasn't the Joseph I knew, the caring husband. The shock on my face seemed to amuse him and his parents as they exchanged smirks, and Joseph started to drive the RV away. This couldn't be real. They wouldn't leave me stranded in the middle of nowhere. Frantically, I dialed my phone, only to be met with a stunning rebuke from my mother-in-law. "Did you honestly believe you were coming with us? How audacious of you. Don't bother calling again. I was looking forward to this trip. But we're on a one-way highway. You can't just turn back. And besides, you're not family. You're just my daughter-in-law. Know your place. We're going to enjoy ourselves without you." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief as the RV disappeared into the distance. The words "you're not family" pierced me to the core, aching with intensity. It was all so cruel. They had me prepare everything, only to leave me behind. Overwhelmed with bitterness and heartache, I had no option but to call a taxi and return home, feeling utterly helpless. Allison, a 31-year-old woman, had been married to her husband Joseph for 2 years. Despite her initial hesitation to live with his parents, Joseph bought a house for them, a short distance away from his parents' place. While it was a relief not to live under the same roof, Allison still faced challenges. Joseph's parents, though free-spirited, often imposed tasks on her, like sudden shopping trips or cleaning their kitchen. Despite feeling harassed at times, Joseph always apologized for his parents' behavior, urging her to endure. His parents were particular about appearances, treating Allison well in front of others. She felt pressured not to speak ill of them, fearing she'd be seen as the villain. Despite her efforts to understand them better, being left behind by Joseph during a planned camping trip was a shock she struggled to recover from. The idea of camping arose during a visit to his parents, where Allison stumbled upon a lantern in the storage room. Curious, she asked about it, sparking a conversation about camping. Excited by Allison's mention of her father's camping enthusiasm and RV ownership, Joseph suggested they go on a family camping trip. With newfound excitement, he urged Allison to rent an RV for their upcoming adventure. "My father cherishes his RV and takes care of it whenever he has free time. I'm not sure if he would lend it to us." "Now it's your job to convince him. You better beg him to lend it to us, got it?" Joseph urged when I hesitated at the sudden request. "It's our first time camping and we don't know what we need, so it would be safer to borrow your dad's RV. Besides, I want to please my parents with a fun camping trip. Please, Allison." His plea left me little choice but to agree. I rushed to my father's place and explained the situation. To my surprise, he readily agreed. "Really? Is it okay?" I asked in disbelief. "Of course. I thought you would refuse because you always polish and take care of it in your spare time. If it's for you, Allison, I'm happy to lend it, and I'm touched by your desire to please Joseph's parents. So take this whole set of camping gear so you can enjoy your first camping trip. If you're a beginner, this and this would be good, my father said, selecting easy-to-use equipment for beginners while explaining various things. I was thrilled to see how much my father cared for me, and it warmed my heart deeply. Perhaps this camping trip could serve as a bridge to bring me closer to my in-laws. All right, I'll work hard to prepare, I assured my father gratefully. I went ahead and reserved a campground equipped with power facilities, along with a nearby hot spring for added relaxation. When I shared the news with my husband and in-laws, they were overjoyed. We're so lucky to have you, Allison. I'm so excited. I can't wait. I'm glad you're happy, Joseph exclaimed, his enthusiasm infectious. On the day of our trip, I climbed into the RV driven by Joseph, brimming with excitement. As we hit the highway, heading towards the campground, my anticipation soared. But soon enough, my mother-in-law's demanding nature resurfaced. Joseph, I'm thirsty. Can we stop at the interchange on our way? She requested. Mom, I brought some drinks. You can pick one from here, Joseph replied, trying to accommodate her needs. None of them really appealed to me. As my daughter-in-law, you should know my tastes, my mother-in-law remarked, her tone dripping with disappointment. I'm sorry, I stammered, feeling the weight of her words. Stepping out of the car at the interchange to buy her the requested Dieter pepper, I was blindsided by my husband's sudden coldness. Allison, you're not a part of our family, so go home now, he uttered, his tone devoid of warmth or understanding. Excuse me? What suddenly got into you? I gasped, unable to comprehend his words. This wasn't the Joseph I knew. He wasn't the one who typically showed me kindness and consideration. My shock only seemed to amuse them as they laughed at my expense, and the RV began to move again, leaving me stranded. They left me here in the middle of nowhere. Is this some kind of joke? Panic set in as I dialed a number, hoping for some semblance of understanding, only to receive a response from my mother-in-law that shook me to my core. You thought you could really come with us? What a brazen woman you are. Not a part of our family. Be aware of that. Bye. We'll enjoy a good family time without you. My mother-in-law's words echoed in my mind as the call abruptly ended. I stood there, stunned and speechless. How could they treat you like this? They had me prepare everything, only to exclude me at the last moment. What was Joseph thinking? Bitterness and sorrow washed over me, but I couldn't dwell on these feelings. Summoning all my strength, I called a taxi and returned home, feeling utterly betrayed. The following day, my husband and in-laws returned from their camping trip, excitedly recounting their adventures. Not a single word of apology passed their lips for leaving me behind. As I pressed them for answers, their response left me dumbfounded. We did it to discipline you as my wife. That's right, Allison. You never understand your place as our daughter-in-law. But there's no need to abandon me on the highway for that. We had to go this far because you wouldn't get it otherwise. My mother-in-law's words cut through me like a knife. We need to properly discipline this failure of a wife before we start living together, my father-in-law added, his tone laced with disdain. The mention of living together sent a chill down my spine. Discussions were happening behind my back, and I was completely unaware. What do you mean by living together? I haven't heard anything about this, I protested, my voice trembling with fear and anger. My parents' place is getting old and is at its limit. I've bought a house where we can invite Dad and Mom to live with us. From next year, we'll be living together, so I'm going to be stricter with you. Be prepared, Joseph declared, his words hitting me like a ton of bricks. Was this his true intention all along? Deciding such a major thing without consulting me at all. I was stunned, feeling utterly betrayed. My anger was overshadowed by a sense of powerlessness as I realized my voice meant nothing to them. And to add insult to injury, after borrowing the RV, they didn't even bother to refill the gas or thank my father. Allison, why are you just standing around? Hurry up and return the RV to your dad. After cleaning the interior, wash the car, then return it to your father. We don't want to be seen as thoughtless, Joseph instructed, his words dripping with insincerity. As I surveyed the interior cluttered with trash, I felt a surge of disappointment. Not only had they ignored me, but they had also disrespected my father's kindness. It was unforgivable. After meticulously cleaning and washing the RV and filling up the gas tank, I returned it to my father. Upon seeing me, he greeted me with a warm smile. How was it? Did you enjoy the trip? I wasn't considered as their family, so I didn't go, I replied, recounting the events of being abandoned at the highway interchange and my husband's sudden decision to live with his parents without consulting me. My father's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of fury. I'll get even for you, Allison. We will not let this slide. I won't let them have their way. Allison, we're getting back at them, he vowed, his determination evident. And in that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. With my father's wisdom guiding me, I returned to my in-laws' house where my husband and his parents were still basking in the excitement of the previous day's events. Keeping my emotions carefully hidden behind a light smile, I addressed them in a gentle tone. There's an even more amazing place than where we went yesterday. The autumn leaves are stunning right now. How about we go on a full-scale camping trip instead of staying in an RV? We could pitch a tent, enjoy a barbecue, and soak in the breathtaking scenery. At night, the sky is filled with stars. It's truly a hidden gem that I don't want to share with anyone else. Can I come too to fulfill my role as your wife? That sounds wonderful. It's going to be so much fun. Since it's in a secluded area, I'll drive, my husband eagerly agreed. As my wife and our daughter-in-law, of course, you should join us. My in-laws chimed in with equal enthusiasm. We decided to go camping again the following weekend. As always, they left all the preparation to me, their demands for discipline growing more incessant each day. But I had my secret plan in motion, meticulously arranging for my revenge. And when the day of our trip arrived, I borrowed an RV from my father, drove to a remote campsite, and watched with satisfaction as my husband and in-laws thrilled at the adventure ahead. Wow, it's like a private site, they exclaimed, eagerly exploring the new environment. We'll go for a walk and enjoy the scenery, Allison. Stow our tent, understood. Enjoy your walk, my husband instructed before they set off, leaving me to prepare the camp. Come on, let's go quickly, I urged, bidding them farewell and then setting to work on the campsite. About 30 minutes later, my husband called in a panic. What, you're lost. I can't find your dad's RV. I'm on my way home with it. What? What do you mean? I asked, bewildered. Don't worry, was his cryptic reply. Unbeknownst to them, I had left only the bare minimum for them to enjoy a real camping experience, a plan devised by my father. He had suggested they experience wild camping, where they would have to fend for themselves, akin to living on a deserted island rather than a convenient camping site with all amenities. You better set up your tent early and look for wood to start your fire. I know you guys have no lighter, so you'll have to start the fire yourself. I've left the pot so you can at least cook rice, my father had advised, ensuring they faced the challenges of nature head-on. You left us behind. You were the ones who said that I, as a wife, wasn't part of the family and shouldn't go camping with you guys. So I took you up to the campsite and tearfully went home. That's what you wanted to do, right? I stated calmly, hitting them with my logic. My husband was momentarily silenced by my words. Enjoy camping with just your family, I added before hanging up. But my husband's rage erupted, and he began yelling at me. Don't be ridiculous. If you don't come back now, I'll get a divorce from you. All right, let's get divorced. You'll regret saying that. Being abandoned on the highway, finding my father's cherished RV filled with trash. I've had enough of living with your parents who do nothing but disrespect me, and you're the ones who will regret it. Stupid woman, I retorted, utterly disgusted by his behavior. He abruptly hung up, leaving me seething with anger. Although I was nearby, I lost all will to go pick them up. After a while, I received another call from my husband. His tone had completely changed, and I could hear his confusion and trembling voice over the phone. I can't set up the tent no matter what. It's starting to rain and my parents are getting angry at me. It's getting cold too. What should I do? It's cold, regretting already. Why don't you look up how to set up a tent on YouTube? I suggested, trying to offer a solution. Forget the tent. My father pulled it too hard and ripped it apart, Allison. You've had your fun. Now fix your attitude and come pick us up, my husband snapped, his frustration evident. I'm not coming. If you walk for about an hour, you'll reach a broad road. If you're not going to camp, then come down here with your stuff, I replied firmly, refusing to bend to his demands. What? Just because I'm asking you nicely doesn't mean you can get all high and mighty, he retorted, revealing his true nature. Any lingering feelings I had for him had completely cooled. All I could do was sigh. Screw this. I'm going to dump all this useless stuff. Just wait till we get home, he muttered angrily before ending the call. Someone owns that place. It's private property. If you dump anything here, you'll be sued for illegal dumping, you know? There's a sign there that clearly states no littering, I warned, trying to reason with my husband. I don't care, he replied, his tone firm and unyielding. It was clear he didn't believe I was serious about the divorce. I had to make him understand the gravity of the situation. After the divorce, I'll be demanding compensation for the emotional distress from all the harassment you've done to me, I asserted, my voice steady and resolute. What? The divorce? Is it? I'm serious, he stammered, finally realizing the seriousness of my words. Our conversation from the time I was left behind on the highway is recorded on my dad's RV's dash cam, so you can't deny it. Not just that, I've also recorded the conversations when you were harassing me afterwards, I stated firmly, laying out the evidence. Let's calm down. We don't have any savings because we've been paying our mortgage. If you leave, I won't have anyone to cook and clean for us, which will be a problem. You should think before you speak, my husband pleaded, trying to appeal to practical concerns. I'm not your maid. If you don't agree to the divorce, I'll take it to court. It's going to become a big deal, and everyone in the family will know, I asserted, refusing to be swayed by his attempts to guilt-trip me. My husband, usually so conscious of others' judgment, fell silent, seemingly at a loss for words. In the background, I could hear his parents fussing, but their opinions no longer held any weight for me. After that, my husband attempted to say something with a preface of you know, but then the call abruptly cut off. Soon after, I started receiving multiple calls from my in-laws, but I ignored them completely. After a while, the calls stopped ringing, indicating their phones must have died from a lack of battery. My father's revenge plan was a resounding success. As I made my way home, I picked up the divorce papers, filled them out, and left them on the table before returning to the comforting embrace of my childhood home, where my kind father awaited me. Meanwhile, my husband and in-laws took an inexplicably long 3 hours to descend the mountain that would normally take only 1 hour. That's why you should have used Google Maps instead of bothering me with calls. How foolish, I remarked to my husband, who arrived at my parents' house in a desperate attempt to salvage our relationship. His anger was palpable. Allison, get out here now. I'll teach you a lesson. If you have something to say, talk to my father. He's pretty upset, so it might not end well for you. But my imposing father stood firm at the entrance, unleashing a tirade against my husband and shutting him down. Moreover, they left their tent and camping gear in the mountains, leading to a lawsuit for illegal dumping filed by the owner of the mountain. The person who filed the lawsuit, none other than my father, who had inherited the land from my grandfather. Security cameras installed due to recurring trespassing and dumping incidents made it clear who was responsible for the mess. As for the punishment, after finalizing our divorce, I demanded and received $1 million each from my husband and in-laws for the emotional distress they caused me. Unable to pay off their mortgage, my husband's house was foreclosed, and he now lives with his parents in their leaky house, leading a modest life as a family of 3. But there's no use crying over spilled milk. I returned to the company I used to work at before getting married, regaining the lifestyle that suits me. Next month, I plan to go camping with my parents, and I'm sure it will be a blast. After all the turmoil, I'm finally reclaiming my happiness and looking forward to brighter days ahead. I'm Sharon, an architect by trade. But today, I'm stepping into the role of a bride, brimming with excitement as I walk down the aisle. Every detail of our wedding, from the flowers to the playlist, bears the mark of my meticulous planning. I've imagined this day as a scene plucked from a romance novel, a celebration of our love. At the altar stands Peter, my soon-to-be husband, an engineer with a practical, no-nonsense approach to life that complements my creative flair. Together, we've always felt like a perfect match, each enhancing the other's strengths. As I approach, I catch a glimpse of something troubled in his eyes, but I chalk it up to pre-wedding nerves. I overhear Peter's mother, Julie, whispering nearby, her gaze intense and unsettling. Despite her strained smile and compliments, her eyes betray a different sentiment. The ceremony continues, but Peter's vows lack the usual warmth, and there's a tense pause before he finally says, "I do." During the ring exchange, Julie insists on capturing the moment with a photo, her words tinged with an air of caution rather than celebration. At the reception, she offers backhanded compliments on my dress, highlighting its beauty while subtly critiquing its non-traditional style. With a light-hearted remark about celebrating love in our own unique way, I deflected Julie's subtle criticisms about our wedding choices. But before the conversation could escalate, Peter intervened, politely asking his mother for a moment alone with me. His interruption seemed like a defense of our decisions, yet his tone hinted at a resignation rather than genuine support. It felt oddly out of place on what should have been a day of pure joy. Scanning the crowd for reassurance, I hoped to find solace in the chaos of the wedding festivities. Yet, deep down, I sensed that something fundamental was wrong. The tension in the air was undeniable, and the red flags waved too boldly to ignore any longer. As Peter and I glided onto the dance floor for our first dance, the distance between us felt more than physical. Though our movements were synchronized emotionally, we were worlds apart. The song, meant to celebrate our unity, now felt like a cruel irony. When the music faded, Peter's attempt at reassurance only served to emphasize the growing chasm between us. "So, Mrs. Sharon, ready for forever?" he asked, the irony of his question hanging heavy in the air. I wanted to voice my doubts, to question whether our tomorrows would be overshadowed by the unease of today. But instead, I masked my concerns with a hesitant affirmation, clinging to the hope that the darkness looming over us would eventually dissipate, and that our rocky start was not indicative of what lay ahead. Unbeknownst to me, this day would merely serve as the overture to a challenging period that would test not only the resilience of our marriage but the very core of my identity. As we toasted to our union, the celebratory words felt hollow, overshadowed by an unsettling sense of loss. The journey back to my home, a charming 3-bedroom house that stood as a symbol of my hard-earned independence, marked the beginning of our shared life. This space was meant to be our sanctuary, the solid ground upon which we would build our future together. However, it quickly became the stage for a series of conflicts that felt more like invasions than the start of marital bliss. Julie, residing just a short distance away, began to visit with alarming frequency, often uninvited. Her criticisms were relentless, targeting everything from my culinary endeavors to the decor of our home. Whether lamenting the flavor of my dishes or the choice of bathroom tiles, her complaints were diverse but equally cutting. Peter's attempts to mediate were feeble at best, appearing more for show than genuine protection. Julie's intrusions became a regular ordeal, each visit an opportunity for her to assert dominance through thinly veiled insults and critiques. The pivotal moment arrived one afternoon when Julie showed up with suitcases in hand, her intentions clear and her sense of entitlement palpable. This wasn't just another visit, it was an invasion, threatening to smother the life out of our fledgling marriage. "I'll be staying here now," she declared, breezing past me to deposit her luggage in my favorite cozy corner by the window, my haven for quiet reflection and reading. "This spot will suit me just fine," Julie proclaimed, her tone leaving no room for argument. I turned to Peter, my eyes pleading for him to intervene, to uphold the sanctity of our home. This was a decision we should have made together. Sensing an opportunity, I called Peter aside, my voice trembling. "This is our home. Shouldn't we have discussed this first?" His gaze met mine, devoid of the warmth and affection that once filled it. "Mom's getting older, Sharon. It's not right for her to be alone. She needs to be with family," he explained, emphasizing the word family in a way that made me feel like an outsider. "So I'm not family? Is that what you're saying?" The words barely escaped my lips before tears welled up, a mix of hurt and frustration. Peter quickly responded, his patience wearing thin. "You know that's not what I mean. But I owe her this. What about us? What about what we owe to each other? We're supposed to be building our life together, not living with your mom," I argued. But it was as if I were speaking to a brick wall. My concerns, my feelings seemed insignificant, and just like that, Julie's move into our home was decided, overriding my wishes. With Julie's arrival, the atmosphere in our home shifted dramatically. Every corner, once filled with our shared dreams, now bore the weight of tension and conflict. My tranquil reading nook was swallowed by her belongings. The kitchen became a battleground for her criticisms, and Peter, the man I married, seemed more aligned with Julie than with me. It hit me that I wasn't just fighting for my marriage or my space anymore. I was fighting for my sense of self, my dignity, and my peace. A nagging thought lingered. How had it come to this? How had my desires, my space, and my voice become secondary to Julie's preferences? The change was stark. My cherished nook became a symbol of Julie's intrusion. The kitchen, a site for her relentless scrutiny, and my husband had transformed into a stranger, siding with what felt like the opposing team. And this was only the beginning. Life, already challenging, spiraled into an unbearable nightmare as the oppressive atmosphere in our home mirrored the shrinking of my own space and voice. Adding to the mounting pressure, a discovery brought everything into sharp focus: the unmistakable presence of 2 blue lines on a pregnancy test, signaling a new life amidst the turmoil. This revelation intensified the situation, rendering the already dense atmosphere almost suffocating. Clutching the pregnancy test, my hands shook with a mix of anticipation and dread as I grappled with the realization that the stakes were now even higher. I had always imagined that discovering I was pregnant would be among the happiest moments of my life, filled with excitement and celebration. Yet, standing alone in the bathroom, tears welling in my eyes as I faced my reflection, I found this milestone felt more like a weighty burden. When I shared the news with Peter, his reaction fell disappointingly flat. "Well, that's something," he muttered, swiftly steering the conversation toward a renovation idea his mother had proposed. It became evident that Julie saw my pregnancy not merely as news, but as her new project. She took it upon herself to oversee every aspect, from my diet to the birthing plan, all under the guise of being helpful. Julie's interference quickly morphed into a form of control. She scrutinized every morsel I ate, casting judgmental glances at even the simplest meals and questioning my weight management, despite my assurances that my diet was doctor-approved. "Doctors these days have no clue," she scoffed dismissively, convinced that her outdated wisdom trumped modern medical advice. As the pregnancy progressed, Julie's demands became increasingly outrageous. She asserted control over my home, expecting me to maintain it to her exacting standards, regardless of my condition. "Sharon, why isn't the living room clean yet?" she would demand from her perch in my once tranquil reading nook, now usurped as her headquarters for endless phone scrolling and TV watching. My pleas for rest fell on deaf ears, with Julie dismissing pregnancy as no excuse for laziness. Peter's silence during these exchanges only exacerbated the tension. His lack of support became glaringly apparent, particularly during a dinner that devolved into an argument over baby names. Julie's harsh critique of my chosen name was the final straw. "Enough, Julie. This is my child, and I will decide how to name them," I countered, my patience worn thin. Her response was one of indignation, as if my assertion of control over my own life was a personal affront. Peter's attempts at mediation, siding with his mother and dismissing me as emotional, widened the rift between us. I was left feeling more isolated than ever, trapped in a home that had become a battlefield where my voice seemed to matter less and less. It was no longer just about choosing a baby name. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, my dignity, and the sense of belonging that had been systematically eroded by Julie's overbearing presence. Staring at the reflection of my once gleaming wedding ring, I scarcely recognized the woman gazing back at me, a woman who was slowly losing everything she cherished: her sanctuary, her self-respect, and most agonizingly, her resolve to stand up for herself. In the midst of one of our tense confrontations, Julie, brimming with a vindictive sense of triumph, delivered a crushing blow that changed everything. She icily suggested that maybe I didn't belong in their family if I couldn't handle a simple family disagreement. Peter's response, or lack thereof, was perhaps the most agonizing part. His silence spoke volumes, conveying that my suffering wasn't just beginning. It had been my reality for far too long. Days blurred together as I navigated through a house that no longer felt like mine, holding on to the only beacon of hope left, the life growing inside me. Yet even this small solace felt threatened in the toxic environment I found myself in. The breaking point arrived on a chilly evening during yet another agonizing family dinner. Despite my efforts to prepare a flawless meal, Julie's criticisms were relentless, attacking everything from the seasoning to the preparation. Her words felt like physical blows, each comment chipping away at my already fragile confidence. But it was her next jab that pierced the deepest, questioning my ability as a mother based on my supposed failure to manage household chores. Peter's acquiescence was the final straw, pushing me past my breaking point. Fueled by a potent mixture of anger, pent-up resentment, and sheer desperation, I found my voice. Step it up? I've been carrying our child, managing our home, and enduring endless criticism from your mother, and you're telling me to step it up. The shock on their faces spoke volumes, but I was beyond caring. For too long, I had allowed myself to be diminished and demeaned. But in that moment, I reclaimed my voice. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. The clarity of my decision cut through years of suppression like a beacon of light. It was a declaration of my refusal to endure any more disrespect or emotional torment. I was prepared to fight for myself, for my child, and for a future liberated from the shadows that had clouded my life. As I spoke, my voice trembled with emotion, yet I remained resolute in my stance. I refused to raise my child in an environment where their mother was constantly undermined. If this is your idea of family, then count me out, I declared, my words ringing with finality as I rose from the dinner table, leaving behind their stunned silence. Gathering only the essentials, I made my way to the door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Julie, ever the provocateur, seized the moment to deliver her most cutting remark yet. And where do you think you're going? This is Peter's house, not yours. Pausing, I turned to face her, my resolve steeling. Actually, Julie, this house is mine. I bought it. I decide who stays and who goes. Peter's voice broke through, laced with desperation. Sharon, please, let's talk about this. But I was beyond negotiation. There's nothing left to discuss. I replied, my tears a testament to the pain of my decision. Stepping out into the cold night felt like embarking on a new chapter of my life, one filled with uncertainty yet also tinged with a profound sense of liberation. The closing door behind me marked the end of a tumultuous saga, a final farewell to a life I could no longer endure. With each step, a mix of pain and determination coursed through me, fueled by the urgent need to reclaim my autonomy. The journey to my parents' home blurred with cold, exhaustion, and heartache. Just moments from the sanctuary of my childhood haven, a stumble sent me crashing to the ground, the physical pain a mere echo of my inner turmoil. Yet, far from deterring me, this fall only strengthened my resolve. Arriving at my parents' doorstep, the concern etched on their faces mirrored the gravity of my situation. As they rushed me to the hospital, I realized this moment of vulnerability marked not just an end, but a beginning. Lying in the hospital bed, the reality of my circumstances sinking in, I knew returning to my former life was not an option. This breaking point was a vital step towards reclaiming the life and dignity that had been stripped away, a painful yet necessary transition towards healing and independence. The clarity that accompanies such moments is profound, illuminating the path forward from the shadows of the past towards a future of my own creation. Amidst a whirlwind of emotions, I stood surrounded by the comforting yet anxious presence of my parents. Their unspoken concern spoke volumes about their fears regarding the true state of my marriage, now starkly unveiled in its troubled depths. Breaking the heavy silence, my mother voiced her concern, her words laden with the weight of the unfolding reality. Sharon, dear, what's your plan now? Uncertain yet determined. I'm not sure, Mom, but one thing's certain. I can't go back to that life. Not now, not ever. My declaration, more assured than I expected, resonated with newfound determination. My father, who had been pacing anxiously, paused to offer reassurance, emphasizing their unwavering support regardless of my decision. He urged me to consider not just my own future, but also the future of the life growing inside me. His words prompted a silent acknowledgement from me. My mind had been a battleground of uncertain scenarios, each fraught with the possibility of a fresh start. The unexpected buzz of my phone shattered my reverie. A message from Peter, a plea for communication. Yet to me, his timing felt like a door long closed. His words, unseen, were left hanging in the void as I powered off my phone, a symbolic end to our dialogue. My next steps became clear, marked by action rather than words. Consulting a family lawyer became my first decisive act towards untangling the turmoil of my marriage. With the unwavering support of my parents, we navigated the cold legal breakdown of our union, discussing divorce, custody arrangements, and financial support. Despite the sterile nature of these discussions, they empowered me, marking the initial steps towards seizing control of my destiny and securing the well-being of my unborn child. Within a week, Peter and Julie received the formal notices, divorce papers for Peter and an eviction notice for Julie from the home that was legally mine. Alongside these were demands for substantial child support and compensation for the emotional turmoil I had endured. Though drastic, these actions were imperative, severing the ties that had long bound me to a life of despair. When I eventually re-engaged with my phone, it was inundated with Peter's attempts to reconnect. His messages carried a blend of regret and a plea for reconciliation. Yet the wounds inflicted by nights of humiliation, years of neglect, and Julie's calculated malice, all silently condoned by Peter, ran too deep. The fleeting temptation to entertain his overtures was swiftly overshadowed by the memory of enduring pain. This moment wasn't merely about closing a chapter, it was about reclaiming my narrative, where the shadows of the past no longer dictated the brightness of my future. The love I once harbored for him had been utterly eclipsed by the sorrow of our shattered marriage. Taking decisive action, I purged his messages, erased his contact details, and blocked him across all social platforms. To me, Peter had become a relic of my history, a distressing chapter I was more than ready to close. Despite the knowledge that the road ahead would be rife with challenges, divorce, especially with a child on the way, is a complex journey. I was finally charting my own course, stepping out from the suffocating shadow that had enveloped me toward a future brimming with hope. On the day of the court proceedings, the atmosphere in the room bore the distinct sterile chill characteristic of spaces where destinies are determined. Seated beside me, my lawyer exuded confidence, while my parents offered silent yet unwavering support from behind. Across the aisle, Peter seemed adrift, the reality of the situation dawning upon him, while Julie's countenance oscillated between shock and defiance. As the session commenced, the judge entered, prompting everyone to rise. What followed was a whirlwind of legal proceedings, with accusations and evidence laid bare. It seemed as though Julie and Peter were seeing their actions for the first time, not just through the lens of the law, but through my perspective as well. When Julie was called to speak, her usual confidence waned. She attempted to justify her actions as concern for her son's well-being, but her explanation fell flat, especially under the judge's skeptical gaze. Judge Nina R. Morrison's verdict was unequivocal and resolute. I was granted a full divorce and sole custody of our unborn child. Peter was ordered to provide child support, while Julie, faced with a substantial fine for emotional abuse and harassment, appeared visibly shaken. As the judge's gavel fell, a wave of liberation washed over me, tinged with a hint of melancholy. My marriage hadn't concluded with dramatic confrontations, but rather with the quiet shuffling of papers and the unwavering voice of justice. This chapter of my life was sealed shut, paving the way for a fresh start unburdened by the chains of the past. The price of my newfound freedom was one I never could have foreseen on the day I exchanged vows. Exiting the courtroom, Peter approached with a bewildered expression, expressing his remorse and disbelief at the unraveling of our lives. Yet, as I looked into his eyes, I no longer saw my future, but rather a profound void where love once dwelled. I never envisioned this as our ending, Peter, but apologies can't undo what's been done, I asserted firmly, turning away to bid farewell to the past. Julie sought my gaze, perhaps in search of forgiveness or acknowledgement, yet I couldn't afford her that closure. She had taken too much from me, and I refused to grant her the satisfaction of witnessing the depth of her impact on my spirit. Stepping into the embrace of the outside world, it felt as though life welcomed me with open arms, with sun shining brighter and colors more vibrant. It was as if I viewed the world through a new lens, unclouded by the shadows of turmoil. My mother's embrace and words of pride brought tears to my eyes. "You're truly free now, Sharon," she said, her emotion palpable. "I couldn't have faced this without you and Dad." I responded, feeling an overwhelming gratitude for their unwavering support. That evening, in the tranquility of my home, now solely mine, I discovered a profound peace, alone yet far from lonely. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was free to live by my own standards. The road ahead as a single mother appeared daunting. Yet as I sensed my unborn child's gentle movements, a wave of confidence enveloped me. We would navigate this journey together, I was certain of it. The trials I had weathered brought me to this juncture of self-discovery. Though they left scars, they told a story of resilience, not surrender. Gazing toward the horizon, I was not merely propelled by circumstance but propelled by choice. This realization filled me with a profound sense of empowerment, poised to embrace what lay ahead, not out of obligation but from a place of deliberate determination. I recognized that this was the dawn of a significant new chapter. Hey, where are you right now? I've been sleeping at home. There's no sign of my husband at our home where I am now. He's lying to me. Let's go back to when I was pregnant with our first child. My name is Ashley. I was finally expecting our first child in our second year of marriage. Just 1 month to go until my due date. I'm 9 months pregnant. While I'm excited about the birth, I can easily imagine the confusion of going through childbirth and child rearing for the first time. I had planned to go back to my parents' house this weekend to have them help me out for a while. I mentioned the idea of going back home to my husband during the stable period of my pregnancy, but I thought he had probably forgotten, so I brought it up again today. While I was relaxing and watching TV, my husband casually mentioned, "Heading back to your parents? Oh yeah, you mentioned that. If you're going, just go. I can handle things here just fine without you." I was shocked by his dismissive tone, but I didn't want to argue, so I decided not to argue back. "Well, I'll be going back this weekend. Our baby is due next month, and I plan to stay there for a month or two after giving birth. So I'll probably be back in about 3 months. Please make sure the baby's room is clean and ready." Okay. I would have done it anyway. "Oh, and I can't see you off this weekend because I have to work." "Oh, all right." I had hoped he would at least come with me to the station, but that hope faded fast. I knew he was always busy with work, even on weekends. But I wish he would think about how hard it will be for me, heavily pregnant and with lots of luggage, to manage on the train. I understand he's busy, but I do feel lonely sometimes. I don't want our soon-to-be-born baby to feel lonely either. Plus, I'm worried about whether we can raise our child together like this. When did he become so distant? With these mixed feelings, I started packing. Since I still had time before going to my parents' house, I decided to send most of my luggage through a delivery service. I had already cleaned the house from top to bottom when I started my maternity leave early. They say pregnant women have a nesting instinct. I had set up a crib and prepared a space for the baby, excited to start our new life as a family of 3. When I returned after 2.5 months, I found that my husband was being really messy despite my efforts to clean up before leaving. Maybe I cleaned too early, but still he seemed to have forgotten how to live in a tidy home. He'd leave half-empty drink bottles lying around and ignore the cardboard boxes from his online shopping. I realized that I'd never seen him cook or clean since we got married. Even though I kept trying to tidy up, things only got messier, and I started worrying about the state of the house while I was away. But with the baby coming soon, I had to focus on preparing for childbirth. The weekend came quickly, and I went to my parents' home. Meanwhile, my husband didn't even see me off to work. While I relaxed at my parents' place, I stayed in touch with him through emails every day and called him about every 3 days. But gradually, he started ignoring my calls more often. When I managed to get through to him, I noticed he'd been avoiding my calls lately. I asked, "You've been hard to reach lately, are you busy?" But his answers were vague, like sort of or not really. Then I asked him nervously, "You're not cheating on me, are you?" I've heard some men do that when their wives are pregnant. He sounded annoyed and denied it, saying, "No, why would I do that?" It's frustrating to be accused. Feeling uneasy, I quickly apologized. Having these worries while carrying our precious baby wasn't good for my mental health. I needed to trust my husband, I decided. A few weeks later, I started having labor pains. As I prepared to go to the hospital, I called my husband. I felt embarrassed to show how much pain I was in, but I really wanted him there when our baby was born. I thought surely he'd be touched by the birth of our child. I'm in labor. It usually takes about half a day for the first baby to arrive, so if you leave now, you should make it in time. I really want you here when the baby is born. You can even cut the umbilical cord. When I asked him to come, my husband sighed in annoyance. "What? You want me to come by train right now?" "Sorry, I'm tired too, I can't. I have work tomorrow." I was shocked. "Are you still talking about work at a time like this? Our baby is being born. Isn't our child more important than work?" He snapped back, "Stop it. My job can't be replaced. This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment, I know. But my work is crucial. If I don't do it, it won't get done. Can't you understand? I have to go. I'm busy." And he hung up. I tried to convince him, but he wouldn't listen. As I sobbed through the pain of labor, I wondered why he was so indifferent to our child's birth. From the moment I found out I was pregnant, my child became my priority. But as a father, he seemed so distant. So I faced childbirth alone. The pain lasted a whole day, and the next day, a beautiful baby boy was born. The baby was so tiny, adorable, and dearly loved. After leaving the hospital, my parents doted on him, teaching me all sorts of things about taking care of him. Within a month, I had gotten pretty good at giving him baths. My parents worried about me, though. "Are you sure you're okay with your husband? We can't help but worry about you when we leave." But not wanting to trouble them, I reassured them, saying, "I think I'll manage somehow. My health is improving faster than I thought. I might go back home next week," I told them. "Really, don't overdo it. Let us know if anything happens," they replied. People often say that recovering from childbirth is like recovering from a car accident, but thanks to hormones, I was in good spirits and my body was healing well. I was also getting the hang of taking care of the baby, so I decided to go back home a bit earlier than planned. While I stayed with my parents, my husband hardly reached out, and even when I sent him photos and videos of our son, he didn't seem interested. I figured maybe the feeling of being a parent really kicks in when you're actively involved in raising the baby, and perhaps he wouldn't feel like a father until he spent time with our son. That's what I hoped, at least. It kept me going. I decided to surprise my husband by having my parents drop me off at home. I didn't tell him I was coming, but he should have been home since it was his day off. I wondered how he'd react when he saw our baby for the first time. Would our baby like our home? After a few hours' drive, we got home. I held our son while my parents brought in our luggage, and I unlocked the door. But when we walked in, the house was dark and silent. "We're back a bit earlier than expected, but we're home now." "Huh, no one's here. What's that smell?" As we stepped into the living room, a terrible odor hit us. When we turned on the light, we couldn't believe what we saw. The room was a mess, like a garbage dump. Dirty dishes and half-eaten food cluttered the sink. Clothes and trash were strewing all over. And there was even moldy juice sitting out, stinking up the place. The table was covered in stains and grime. The bathroom was also filthy, with black mold in the shower and sink, and the toilet was dirty and smelly. And worst of all, the crib we had prepared for our son was filled with unused cardboard boxes and trash bags. I had asked them to keep the house clean for our baby, but this was the opposite, and I was shocked. There's no way we can live in such a dirty house, and I'm especially upset about the crib being ruined. Seriously, what's going on here? There was no way we could raise a baby in a place like this. My parents were furious and searched for my husband, checking every room, but he was nowhere to be found. Where could he be on his day off? Was he working another weekend shift? But we couldn't even confirm if he had been working those shifts before. He wasn't paid extra for weekend work, and his company followed the regular work schedule. I had been suspicious of his disappearing acts on weekends. "Let's try calling him," I suggested. Unable to bear being in the messy room any longer, I ushered my confused parents outside and dialed my husband's number. But he didn't pick up. Finally, after the third attempt, he answered. "Hey, where are you?" I asked. "I'm at home," he replied. "Why?" "Just at home," he repeated. We had searched the entire house, but there was no sign of my husband. Could he possibly be buried under all this trash? But we couldn't sense anyone there, and his voice didn't sound like he had just woken up. Then I heard a woman's voice on the phone. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it was definitely a woman's voice. That's when it hit me. He's cheating on me. I can't believe he'd do this while neglecting our child. The house was a disaster while we were away, and he was cheating on me. I was furious. A father like him isn't needed for our son. I'm done with a husband like this. If he prefers that other woman, then he can have her. How can you live in such a filthy and foul-smelling house? Oh, I understand. Maybe a burglar broke in. I need to call the police. What? But you're at your parents' house, right? What are you saying? Suddenly, my anger boiled over at my husband's evasiveness, and I raised my voice. You're the one lying about being at home, aren't you? Stop pretending. It's completely unacceptable to let the crib turn into a mess. I'm not returning to this house. We're getting a divorce. I ended the call abruptly and quickly reported to the police about the supposed burglary, intending to confront my husband. I instructed my parents and son to head back to my parents' house and waited for my husband in front of our home. The police arrived before my husband did. I welcomed them into the house as if they were guests, and soon after, I spotted my husband approaching, accompanied by another woman. As my husband came closer, his expression seemed to say, "This is bad." I confronted him, saying, "Hey, you weren't supposed to be back until next month." "But who is she?" The woman next to him glared at me, her arms crossed. "And who are you, for that matter?" she retorted. Despite encountering his mistress, I strangely felt calm. I decided to question the woman. It turned out my husband had been meeting her without revealing he was married. I was so disgusted with him that I didn't know how to react anymore. "Hey, at least let me explain," my husband pleaded, trying to grab my shoulder, but I slapped his hand away, not wanting him to touch me. "Don't touch me. It's disgusting. The police are checking the room right now. I hope you're embarrassed having them see the mess you've made. I'm leaving now. You can explain to the police. Goodbye." Leaving them stunned, I went back to my parents' house, ignoring the numerous calls from my husband. That night, I finally decided to respond. It seemed he had explained the situation to the police, and he returned home looking troubled. It must have been embarrassing for him to see the police struggling in the messy room, but he brought it upon himself. After being rejected by the woman he had been deceiving, all that was left for him was shame and a wrecked house. "Please, I'm sorry. Come back. I've been looking forward to seeing our son," he pleaded. If he truly felt sorry, he should have come to my parents' house at least. Thinking he could apologize over the phone, and everything would be fine shows what kind of person he is. I can't imagine a future with him. Even though you never showed any interest before, you suddenly care? You weren't even there when I gave birth, despite me asking you to come several times, I pointed out. "Well, I thought you knew that I would. I'll clean up the room. I can't do household chores without you. I need you," he pleaded. I could imagine my husband growing more desperate and flustered on the other end of the line as I continued to reject him. "No matter how much you beg, it's not happening. You should have stuck with that woman. If you can't handle housework, have her do it for you," I responded firmly. "But that was just a fling. It was a momentary lapse. You're the only one for me, Ashley," he insisted. "A fling? Weren't you seeing her every time you said you had to work overtime?" I countered. "Well, that's a different..." He trailed off, unable to explain himself. I pressed my husband, who was mumbling incoherently, and he confessed that he had been cheating on me with multiple women from his high school that he had reconnected with at a friend's wedding party. He's a scumbag either way. There's no point in talking, I thought to myself as I listened to him desperately apologizing, his voice close to tears. "I can't believe it. You disgust me. Were you planning to touch our son with those hands?" "Unthinkable," I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. I won't do it again. I'll come to pick you up right now. I want to see you and our son. I'll prove my sincerity. Let's go home together," he pleaded. I couldn't believe what I was hearing from his defiant voice. What was he thinking at this point? "I can't trust you. There's nothing more to talk about. I'll raise our son on my own," I declared firmly. "Ashley, please forgive," he began, but I hung up before I could hear the rest of his words. The sound of the call ending echoed emptily in my ear, and that marked the end of our short marital life. Half a year has passed since then, and I've decided to start working, relying on my parents for support. Once I've saved up enough money, I intend to leave my parents' house and start living on my own with my son. I'm in the midst of divorce negotiations with my husband, mainly for the sake of alimony. Despite his limited experience living alone, my husband is apparently unable to manage household chores, and most of his meals are from dining out, leaving his house in disarray. However, that's no longer my concern. I will do my best, showering my son with abundant love and care. They were like strange creatures I'd never seen before. They congratulated me on marrying my brother. They said my dress was nice, but then one of them suggested that hers looked better. I felt like saying that might hurt the bride's feelings. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. In the room where the bride was getting ready, I was surprised by my sister-in-law and mother-in-law. They made rude comments with a sassy attitude. I couldn't believe how they talked down to me, and my sister-in-law's outfit was outrageous. Her dress was so white it could have been mistaken for a wedding dress, and it showed off her thighs through a slit. She even had fur wrapped around her off-shoulder design. My mother-in-law looked at her daughter with so much love. Meanwhile, my husband looked at them with a cold expression. I never thought I'd experience such bullying on my wedding day. It was too much to handle. Looking back, it's no wonder my sister-in-law's attempts at matchmaking never worked out, considering how she behaved even at someone else's wedding. My name is Anaya. I was born in a coastal town and grew up in a normal family. When I went to a state university, I stayed with my grandma, who lived nearby. Living with her, someone who always cared for me, was my dream. Her cozy old house blended Western and ethnic styles, giving it a nostalgic feel that I adored. Even after finding a job, I chose to stay there, enjoying moments on the balcony, chatting with grandma, and snacking on seasonal fruit. When grandma got sick, I took over caring for the house, hoping she'd recover, but sadly that wish never came true. As grandma's health declined, she moved to a facility in our hometown. I want to look after grandma, I insisted, but she smiled and told me, "You've done more than enough. I want you, Anaya, to find happiness." After grandma passed away, I married Jesse, who had always been there for me. Now we live in a house filled with memories of grandma, but our peaceful newlywed life is often disrupted by two troublesome women. How did someone like you, with such an ordinary face and slim figure, end up marrying my brother? One day, my mother-in-law asked me to make lunch for my sister-in-law, who had a meeting with the neighborhood association. Instead of thanks, my sister-in-law greeted me with sarcasm. I just wanted to leave, but if I did, they'd likely follow me home. Satisfied with her own conclusion, sister-in-law said, "Ask your brother." "Well, maybe you two are a good match since he's not that great either." Then she quickly ate the curry I made. I think she believes that eating slowly in front of men makes her more attractive. My sister-in-law might seem mischievous, but what's really scary is her lack of consideration for others. She looks down on everyone, including me and her own brother, without a second thought. It's really tiring. And dealing with her mother, who raised her, is even more challenging. Instead of simply disliking me, my mother-in-law seems more focused on boosting her daughter up by putting me down and giving me orders. That's why she always asks me to do things. If I don't pay attention to her daughter, she'll either keep calling me or show up at my door nonstop. It's like a never-ending nightmare. Mother-in-law always made it clear that her daughter was her top priority and didn't seem to care much about her son, my husband. He insists he wasn't mistreated, but he also says he never felt valued. His father left for a work assignment 10 years ago and never came back, even after retiring. Despite this, he still sends money for their living expenses, so it seems neither mother-in-law nor sister-in-law care much about him. My husband tries to talk to them about their behavior, but they ignore him. To them, he's just another person to look down on. It broke my heart to see my husband suffer more than me, and I often gave in to mother-in-law's demands, which was a mistake. The two of them became increasingly difficult to bear, and as a couple, we grew exhausted. We couldn't continue like this. So determined my husband and I decided to come up with a plan. Just when we were almost ready, mother-in-law and sister-in-law unexpectedly came to our house. It was a hot summer day, and my husband was at work. With reluctance, I greeted them. "Hello, sister-in-law. What brings you here?" Just because we're your cute sister-in-law and mother-in-law doesn't mean we need a reason to visit. You need to work on that stingy attitude. It's hot outside. Let us in. You're so thoughtless, sister-in-law snapped. I really didn't want to welcome them into Grandma's cherished house, but to avoid making a scene, I reluctantly let them in. I served them coffee and some cookies I had baked the day before. "What? No cake?" Sister-in-law complained. "I'm sorry we came unannounced." "Well, it's fine. Your cooking is all right, even if it's a bit simple," mother-in-law added. "That's true. We'll give you that," sister-in-law agreed. Strangely, their compliments felt more eerie than nice. "The house is old but roomy. It's decent," mother-in-law remarked. "To me, this house is just right," sister-in-law added. "Elle is getting married," mother-in-law suddenly dropped the bombshell. Wait, this self-centered sister-in-law. I was briefly shocked, but her getting married wasn't all that surprising. She often boasted about her shapely figure and her direct approach with men. It seemed to work on gullible men or those seeking casual relationships. "So, is it with the guy you had an affair with?" I remembered a man she had mentioned before. "It wasn't an affair, we just met in the wrong order. It's true love, but no, not him," she brushed off. "The one who recently approached you?" I just noticed his intense gaze and made the first move, but no, not him either. I met him at a speed dating event. He's the son of a wealthy man, mother-in-law proudly announced. "That's right, I'm having a shotgun wedding with a rich guy. Good for Elle, unlike your brother who married someone like you, she added, taking a jab at me. I'm already pregnant, she continued, driving her point home. The speed dating event was about 3 months ago. She probably charmed an unsuspecting man. I feel sorry for him and his family, mother-in-law commented. Did you end things with the other guys? I asked. Not yet. They all adore me so much, I can't bring myself to break it off. It's bound to happen eventually. Elle is just so charming. But what truly makes Elle happy is money, sister-in-law explained. I had a feeling, but I still wondered if the child was really fathered by that wealthy man. We want to use this house for a pre-wedding family gathering. Their hidden agenda became clear. I was so disgusted that I blurted out my response, absolutely not. They glared at me, and to avoid a confrontation, I quickly tried to smooth things over. I didn't want to make a scene, so I scrambled to find the right words. I think a groom's family would prefer to see their future daughter-in-law's actual home, but our place is a bit messy, and it's just a small apartment. Then tidy up and stop smoking indoors, sister-in-law snapped back. But won't it seem odd if they're invited to the bride's brother's place? I expressed my worry. You're not understanding. We'll just say this is Elle's family home. What if they find out the truth? As long as you and your husband keep quiet, it'll be fine. You're getting married, so pretending just for the introduction won't fix anything. Once we're married, he's mine, and besides, I'm pregnant, sister-in-law asserted. It's not that simple. You're so thoughtful to be concerned. But why not just make this house truly belong to mom and dad? Sister-in-law's absurd suggestions left me speechless. Oh, come on. What a terrible idea. This house belongs to my grandma. It's not just up to me, I objected. Don't you understand? Once you're married, everything belongs to the husband's family. It's a common rule, sister-in-law argued. Well, you better get used to it. What's yours is now ours. So next Sunday, we'll bring the fiance and his family over. And make sure to prepare a fancy and cute meal, of course. We'll pretend Elle made it and even change the curtains to match Elle's teeth, mother-in-law chimed in. We're relying on you, sister-in-law, they said before leaving, imposing their wishes and convenience on me. All that was left was my boiling anger and a stack of dirty dishes. I'm sorry, we won't let them use it, my husband said that night, his heart heavy after hearing the news. Of course not, but even if we say no, they'll just force their way in. Maybe we should accelerate our plan. I could handle their mistreatment of me, but I won't stand for them disrespecting Grandma's house. We'll make them pay for all the bullying, so be prepared, I declared. The next day, I made several calls. Despite the sudden change of plans, everyone was understanding. I was truly thankful. Once everything was arranged, I called mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, I want to make sure Elle's wedding is perfect. Can we have a bit more time? We're planning to renovate to make it just right for the couple, I proposed. Anaya, I misjudged you. You're truly kind-hearted. But we need to get going with the wedding preparations, so please hurry, she replied. I understand. We'll be ready in 3 weeks. Why don't you start searching for a wedding venue? I suggested. You're very considerate. It's almost surprising. But yes, we'll leave the introduction to you and focus on the wedding, she agreed. Was this our first pleasant conversation and perhaps our last? Those two won't suspect a thing, and they won't set foot in this house until the day of the wedding. Okay, we're going to be really busy starting today, my husband said. We had a very close deadline. We would work really hard without much rest, but it was all for our future. 3 weeks later, the day my mother-in-law had set for meeting us arrived. My husband and I were nervous, waiting for her phone call. I could almost imagine my mother-in-law's angry face as she called. At 10:00 a.m., my phone rang, showing my mother-in-law's name. I answered the call. Anaya, what did you do? My mother-in-law's voice sounded very upset. I thought you'd like it. I made a perfect meal for you and Elle, I replied. What did you do? She asked again, her voice getting louder and more panicked. But her words were hard to understand. The place she brought her fiance's family to, pretending it was her home, wasn't Grandma's house anymore. I had prepared a new home and meal for them, but it seems they weren't happy about it. Mother-in-law's words were still hard to understand. She probably wanted me to explain everything to the other side. I'll do that. I'm sorry if I made you upset. Can you put me on speaker so the groom's mother can hear? I asked. The shouting stopped, and a calm woman's voice came through. "Are you Aaron's mother? It seems there's been a mix-up." "Oh wait, not Aaron, sorry," she corrected herself. "So Aaron finally left his wife for Elle, or is it Ivan Phil?" I listed all the men my sister-in-law had been involved with. "Anaya, stop it!" Mother-in-law screamed, louder than before. The call ended. They were probably in the middle of a big argument. Ah, that felt satisfying. Anaya, my husband, who had listened to the whole conversation, looked at me with apology in his eyes. "I'm sorry for making you do that. I should have handled it," he said, sounding regretful. "No, remember I said I wanted to get back at them one last time for Grandma's beloved house. Come on, I've explained this. Grandma wanted me to be happy. I love that house, but you're more important to me than it." My mother, Grandma's heir, had planned to demolish the house, turning it into vacant land. It was earthquake resistant, but keeping up an old house is hard. I had been insisting on living there because of my love for it, but after marrying my husband and dealing with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, I changed my mind. I didn't want them to ruin that house, but I didn't want to leave my husband either, so I wanted to say goodbye to Grandma's house with good memories. That's why I asked my husband to find a new job, and we prepared to move back to my hometown. We just sped up our plans. I had Grandma's house demolished and built a small dog house in the middle of the empty land with a tag that says L. It looked like a cozy log cabin, but it cost us a bit more than we planned. I even got some fancy dog food from the pet store. Everything was set. Grandma liked you. She wouldn't want us to break up because of that house, Anaya. "I promise I won't waste the chance you've given me," my husband said, looking at me with sincerity. I trusted him when he made that decision. It's been a year and a half since then. After we moved to my hometown, my husband, who was a bit unsure at first about the fishermen in the neighborhood, has become even more popular with them than I am. He seems to really enjoy the coastal town's breeze and all the seafood dishes. His once pale skin now has some color to it. Seeing him happily eating grilled salmon for dinner makes me really happy, I told him. "Did you check your emails today?" my husband asked. "No, nothing new. They're probably busy. We haven't talked to my mother-in-law and sister-in-law since that whole thing happened. My husband's phone is the only way we could reach them," I said. We found out about the doghouse situation from a neighbor who was friends with Grandma. The house my mother-in-law and sister-in-law showed Grandma was torn down, and now there's just a doghouse there. And from the dog food bowl, there's a fancy smell of perfume, I added. The two were really upset, saying it was all because of my brother's wife. When the Fiances family got a hint over the phone about my sister-in-law's bad taste in men, they confronted them. They got really nervous and couldn't give a clear answer. Later, the Fiances' parents hired a detective to check on my sister-in-law's behavior, but they found nothing except lies and a lot of boyfriends. This made them do a DNA test on the unborn baby, and they found out it wasn't the rich man's. So the engagement was called off. The real father of the baby turned out to be one of the men my sister-in-law was seeing. He was happy to have a child with her, and they got married. But his mom was angry that her son was with an older woman she didn't like, so she insisted they all live together. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was mad that her daughter was taken away, so she rented an apartment near the newlyweds and they fought a lot. My sister-in-law, who wanted to marry rich and have an easy life, now looks tired from dealing with her mother-in-law and doing housework and taking care of the baby. But the good part is, her husband really loves the baby, so they're managing on their own. My husband's phone rings. "Oh, it's an invitation for drinks from my father-in-law. Your dad really likes you," I mentioned. I like hearing his stories, and my mother-in-law always makes my favorite food. I see now that my own mom never cared to know what I liked. "This is what having a family feels like," my husband whispered. "Don't worry, you'll be the kind of parent who knows all their child's favorites," I comforted him. As I said this, I gently rubbed my growing belly, and he smiled warmly. "I feel like we can make that happen in this house," he said, looking at the caramel-colored beam on the ceiling. "It's a special beam we kept from Grandma's house when we tore it down. We put it in our new home as a reminder of Grandma. It was my husband's idea to keep the beam, even when I wanted to start fresh. That's why I chose to build our future with him. Let's make this house just as wonderful as Grandma's," I declared. "Yes, definitely," my husband agreed. "In this peaceful coastal town where you can hear the waves, our little house stands. This is where we'll create our happiness. When Walter and I visited my husband's parents, his mom came to pick us up from the airport. She said I couldn't ride in the car, so I had to walk home. I felt really upset about this, especially because it's a long 3-hour walk, even though I'm strong. I was almost in tears, but thankfully someone helped me out. In the end, it was my mother-in-law who felt sorry for what she did. My name is Jennifer, and I'm 30 years old. I met my husband, Walter, when we were both in college. We love mountain climbing. Walter is 2 years younger than me, and he's really good-looking and popular. When he asked me out, I couldn't believe it, but he says he likes how I tackle challenges without complaining. Walter has a good job at a big company and earns a lot of money. We've been happily married since college, but there's something that bothers me. During dinner, Walter always gets calls from his mom and leaves to talk to her in his room. Walter's mom calls him often, about once every 2 days. She really loves her son, and Walter is very sweet to her, which makes me wonder if he's too attached to his mom. But since she raised him well, I feel like I should respect her too. However, it seems like our feelings toward each other are different. It started before we got married when we went to visit my husband's parents. Walter's mom didn't seem happy when she found out I'm 2 years older than him and almost 30. She seemed unhappy throughout our visit, but Walter's dad didn't mind. He said age doesn't matter and that I seem like a reliable person who's perfect for Walter, who has his weaker moments. But that made Walter's mom even more upset. Walter's mom didn't want to argue with his dad directly, so she decided to make things difficult for me without him noticing. Sometimes she'd say things like, "Oh dear, I'm sorry, Jennifer, but the snacks I gave you are bad. Let me get you something else." When she was being mean on purpose, she'd widen her eyes, snort, and twist her lips. I felt like I was studying her behavior like a scientist studying animals. "It's all right, I can eat it." I smiled and cut off the spoiled part of the dried fruit and ate the rest. Back from my mountain club days, I learned to make do with whatever food was available. Walter's dad and Walter himself chuckled, saying, "That's just like Jennifer," and we all laughed. But then Walter's dad told his mom not to serve me something like that again. And the mood stayed light, but I wasn't paying enough attention. "I'm sorry," I said, still laughing, but I caught her quick, sharp glance and heard her tongue click disapprovingly. There were other times, like when she showed off souvenirs from Italy. She gave Walter a nice tie, but for me, it was a cheap t-shirt with a fake logo. "Come on, try on the tie, Jennifer. You too, try on the shirt," she said, with that same expression on her face. I realized it was another jab at me. No thanks. I don't wear ties with casual clothes, and I'm not feeling like trying on a shirt right now, I said, trying to keep the mood light with a smile, but inside, I was really frustrated. After that, I only used that t-shirt for things like gardening in the summer or as a funny prop in photos with my friends. I couldn't stand even looking at it. These little mean acts were subtle, so only I could really tell what was going on. When I tried talking to Walter about it, he'd just brush it off, saying, "Mom's a bit odd, forgive her." But the constant negativity was wearing me down. We live about an hour's drive from my in-laws, so it was always hanging over us that we could visit them whenever. That thought made me feel down. Then, out of the blue, Walter told me, "Jennifer, I've got some sudden news. I'm being transferred. It starts next month, so get ready." Walter was being moved for work. He said sorry, but secretly I felt relieved. It gave us a reason to keep our distance from my in-laws. "Okay, don't worry. I'll handle the preparations. I'll even ask my family for help." I happily went ahead with the moving preparations. Finally, I thought I could escape from my mother-in-law's constant teasing. Although I was nervous about starting a new life, most of my excitement came from the thought of getting away from her. Once the move was done, I hoped I could put some distance between us, but then the phone rang. It was my mother-in-law, asking where I'd been and hinting that I might be ignoring her son to spend time with my own parents. I wanted to let out a big sigh, but I stayed calm and explained that I was just busy at the store and wanted to make sure Walter had good meals in our new home. Her calls started coming more often, every 2 days. Even though we were seeing each other less, we were talking more. But most of the time, it was just her making little digs at me. She'd say things like, "My son is sensitive." I wonder if someone as tough as Jennifer can understand him. His high school girlfriend was so delicate, but now his tastes have changed, haven't they? It was always stuff meant to make me feel uncomfortable. It seems like Walter's mom doesn't have another way to deal with her stress. And unfortunately, I became the target for it. It felt like I was just a dumping ground for her frustrations. What hurt the most were her comments about having children. She'd say things like, "Jennifer, you're already 30. Can you even have a normal child being older than my son?" It was shocking to hear such outdated and hurtful remarks, especially since I'd been worrying about that myself lately. I couldn't help but cry after hanging up the phone. I wondered what she really thought of me. Did she believe that her words wouldn't hurt me? As I kept giving neutral answers to avoid confrontation, maybe she got bored of trying to bully me, and the calls started to decrease. It was a huge relief for me. Then, on New Year's Day the next year, my husband and I went to visit my in-laws. They were picking us up from the airport. Walter's dad greeted us warmly, which was a relief because I was really anxious about seeing his mom. His friendliness made me feel better. We exchanged New Year's greetings, and despite my worries, it seemed like things might be okay. We exchanged New Year's greetings, but my mother-in-law didn't even glance at me. Maybe she was upset about my distant response to her constant calls. Our relationship was strained, and I was trying to figure out how to handle it. "Were you tired from the trip? How about we grab a coffee at the airport cafe?" Walter's dad suggested, oblivious to the tension between his wife and me. "Sounds good. Isn't there a cafe on the second floor?" Walter replied cheerfully, and we made our way to a cafe inside the airport. "Should I drive us home?" Walter offered. "No, I'm still comfortable driving," his mother replied curtly. While the men chatted away, my mother-in-law and I sat in silence. "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom," I said after placing my order, and I stood up from the table. "Oh, I think I'll go too," my mother-in-law said, getting up to follow me. I had a sinking feeling about this. As we approached the entrance to the women's restroom, my mother-in-law, walking behind me, suddenly said, "Since you can't ride in the car, why don't you just walk back?" Confused by her words, I turned to look at her, and there it was again, that same expression on her face. "We're going back as a family of 3. You're a stranger here, aren't you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Walk back from here to my in-laws' house? How far was that? And to call her son's wife a stranger. I stood there, frozen in shock, as my mother-in-law kept hurling words at me. "I've been kind enough to call you often, but you always respond so coldly. Living near your parents' house has made you arrogant. I don't even want to think of you as my daughter-in-law. You're just a stranger, a complete stranger." Her voice was getting louder. I was stunned, but I didn't want to make a scene in public, so I replied quietly, "Yes, I understand." Feeling too embarrassed to go back to where Walter and his dad were, I headed towards the airport exit, feeling heavy-hearted. Even though she told me to walk back, this was an airport, surely there were taxis or buses. I could take one as far as possible and then walk the rest of the way. But more than that, I was worried about how I would face my in-laws after this incident and how I would spend the next few days with them. For now, I searched for transportation to my in-laws' house on my phone. There was a bus leaving in just 10 minutes, but it wouldn't take me directly there. From where it dropped me off, I'd have to walk. It might take about 3 hours in total. 3 hours. I could manage that with my legs trained from mountain climbing. But there's a big difference between walking for fun and being forced to walk because of harassment. Tears filled my eyes. Was it really my fault? Maybe if I had been nicer on the phone, even after hearing those hurtful things, none of this would have happened. Lost in these thoughts as I walked, I suddenly felt a tap on my shoulder from behind. "Jennifer, why are you walking here?" It was Walter's dad. "Didn't my wife say something to you at the restroom?" "I was on my way there too, and I saw you and my wife talking, and then you started to leave, so I followed you." Looking at his kind face, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, running down my cheeks. "Jennifer, what's going on?" he asked with concern. I made up my mind to tell Walter's dad the truth. So I shared with him exactly what his wife had said, and he became angrier than I'd ever seen him. Oh my, did she really say that to my son's wife? Then, to my surprise, he said something unexpected. "I'll walk with you, Jennifer." With that, he stepped in front of me and began walking. Father-in-law? Don't worry. I used to enjoy mountain climbing, and I went on many trips with Walter when he was little. A 3-hour walk one way is nothing. Sure enough, Walter's dad walked with a steady stride, not at all like someone in their 60s. "Come on, let's go." We didn't tell Walter we were leaving. Is that okay? I suddenly remembered that I hadn't informed Walter about our departure. Walter will be all right. She'll probably convince him to wait. I'll give him a call. With that, Walter's dad took out his phone. He was sending a text to Walter's mom. He let her know that he was walking back with me and that the car keys were in his bag. While we waited for the bus, Walter's dad's phone rang. He answered, and I could tell from his tone that he was trying to control his anger. It must have been Walter's mom on the other end. I heard what you said to Jennifer. If you're going to talk like that, then I won't ride in the car either. I could hear Walter's mom's panicked voice shouting from the other end. That's not true. She said she wanted to walk for exercise. I was more bewildered than anything. We'll discuss this when we get home, Walter's dad said firmly as he hung up and pocketed his phone. Maybe because Walter's dad's phone was busy, mine started ringing next. It was definitely Walter's mom. Walter's dad and I exchanged a glance. What could she want now? To tell us to get in the car? I definitely wasn't going to pick up, so I decided to ignore it too. Father-in-law and I quietly boarded the bus and continued our walk after getting off. This way is a shortcut. There's a slope here for a while. But let's do our best, he said, occasionally offering advice as we walked. It almost felt like we were climbing a mountain together, but I hadn't planned on walking so much today, and I was just wearing regular boots. Father-in-law had on leather shoes. This is going to be tough on our feet, I thought to myself, but I only asked once. Father-in-law, are your feet okay? Won't walking for a long time in those shoes hurt them? He glanced at my feet and squinted. Looks like we're in the same boat. It's unbelievable that she would make a woman walk so far in those shoes. We both thought about calling a taxi, but neither of us said anything, wanting to defy Walter's mom. But Jennifer, you're strong. You're walking such a long distance without complaining. I bet that's what attracted Walter to you, he said, making me feel a little better. After a long walk, we kept going, stopping at a grocery store to buy drinks from vending machines to stay hydrated. About 3 hours later, as the sun started to set, we finally reached my in-laws' house. Their car was parked out front. Mother-in-law and Walter must be inside. We're back, Father-in-law announced as he opened the front door, and Walter rushed over. Jennifer, I was so worried. What happened? Why did you suddenly decide to walk back for exercise? Did Mom say something? No, that's not it. Mom told Jennifer to walk back, Father-in-law explained, looking understandably exhausted as he took a seat near the entrance. Mother-in-law, who had just come out of the living room, looked shocked and pale. No, that's not true. It's not what happened. It seems there's been a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? I couldn't stay silent any longer. You said, since you can't ride in the car, why don't you walk back? Didn't you? I stated plainly. I despise lying, and this situation reminded me of my mountain climbing club days. A 3-hour walk one way was good exercise. Walter glanced at his mother. He knows I'm not the type to lie, I added. The eyes of Walter, his father, and I were all fixed on mother-in-law. What, you believe this woman over me? You're choosing her over your family? She's just a stranger, isn't she? Mother-in-law screamed. So I wasn't allowed in the car because I'm a stranger, I said quietly. Mom, I can't believe you would say something like that. Jennifer is an important part of my family. I wanted you to feel the same way, Walter said, his fist clenched, his hand trembling with anger. If you're going to treat Jennifer like this, I'm done with you, Mom. I won't answer your calls anymore. Don't contact Jennifer either, Walter declared, taking my hand firmly. Let's go. Walter, wait, but Walter slammed the door shut, and without a backward glance, he took my hand and we started walking. A year later. Hey Jennifer, Walter, come check out this view. It's amazing up here. Walter, his father, and I were out mountain climbing together. 6 months after the New Year incident, Walter got a transfer and we moved back to our old neighborhood. After what happened at the New Year celebration, Walter's dad decided to get a divorce and move closer to our house. Climbing together on weekends has become a regular thing for us. Shall we have lunch here? At the summit, we eagerly began preparing our meal. As we worked, Father-in-law started talking. Mom went on a spending spree after the divorce. Even though the property was divided fairly, it seemed she's already having financial troubles. Maybe she was feeling lonely. The divorce was tough, with lots of crying and screaming. Maybe it's best for both of us to have some distance now. She needs to expand her world too. Otherwise, she's the type to take out her stress on those close to her. I listen quietly to their conversation. I'll focus on my own world so I don't have to unload my stress onto others. Looking out at the view from the mountain with my dear family, I made that promise to myself.